Chapter 1979. Zhang Yan tried to look into the door but found that he could not see what was going on inside. This was undoubtedly the method of someone of the same generation. Although he had already connected the two realms, he could still feel that there was a thin thread between the realm on the other side and Busu Tian. If he was not careful, he might disappear again. Therefore, he did not stay outside for too long. With a thought, he turned into a shadow clone and entered. Once he entered, what he saw was a mass of misty clouds. Their movements were erratic, and they gathered and dispersed without form. Apart from that, there was nothing else. He sensed that this world was particularly strange. It was invisible, as if everything was changing. However, if he looked carefully, there were some signs. As he looked deeper, he gradually recognized a shape. Seeing this scene, he already had a guess. After pondering for a moment, he stretched out his hand and pulled away the clouds in front of him. This cloud was not ordinary. There was a hidden universe inside. If a living being was unknowingly drawn into this, they would only be able to rotate in this thing, thinking that the inside world was just now. Even if a true young cultivator was here, they might not be able to distinguish it. However, he was a spirit refinement cultivator who killed Wanzhen. Naturally, he could see through it at a glance. Without these obstacles, the true appearance of the inside world was soon revealed. It was as if a colorful picture was unfolding in front of him. Countless misty clouds floated in the air, colorful petals danced in the air, rainbow bridges flew, white waterfalls splashed, celestial music lingered in the ears, and in the misty mist, long dragons roamed in and out, playing there. His eyes swept across. Although there were other living beings here, there was no doubt that these dragons were the masters of this world. At this moment, he felt a strange aura. He looked up into the sky, and his eyes continued to look deeper. Soon, he saw a crystal jade dragon eye floating there. With just one glance, he knew the use of this thing. It was used to prevent the divination of powerful beings. Of course, if he were to forcefully do so, he would still be able to see some things. However, since the other party had placed this item here, it had already indicated that he did not like being spied on by others. Moreover, he had only come here to visit and did not intend to be an unwelcome guest. Naturally, there was no need for him to do so. At this time, in the floating mountain, there were two big dragons with a little bit of cultivation seemed to have sensed his arrival. They turned in the clouds and each turned into human form. One was a tall and straight man, wearing a golden robe and a tall crown. His appearance was dignified. The other was a delicate and pretty young girl, dressed like Guma, without any makeup, looking very simple. The two of them came to Zhang Yan uneasily and bowed to him. "May I know which Tao ancestor has come? We hope that Tao ancestor can forgive us for not welcoming you." Zhang Yan looked at them and said with a smile, "To be able to guess I's identity, your cultivation is not shallow. May I know what is the name of this place, and which Tao ancestor do you belong to?" The man hurriedly said, replying to this Tao ancestor, "There is no name here. The living beings here are only born knowing the heaven and earth. We are all the descendants of the ancestor saint." At this point, he was a little troubled. As for the name of the ancestor saint, us juniors also do not know. Ancestor saint? Zhang Yan pondered for a while. To be called the ancestor saint, it must be the source of a certain race's bloodline, and among the dragon species, the one who had such a title was undoubtedly the dragon ancestor. He once had a judgment that all the dragon species in the heavens had a common source, but he had never been able to confirm it, and he did not know if it was this one. He asked, "May I know where your ancestor is now?" The man replied, "The ancestor saint has not been here for a long time. We juniors have never seen him before, but every time an elder reaches the end of his life, he will be taken away by the ancestor saint." When Zhang Yan heard this, he could not help but become a little more interested. He came here to see if he could find the ancestors of his sect who had ascended, but he did not expect that this place was the land of the dragon species, and it was not quite the same as what he had thought before. However, he did not feel very disappointed because when his consciousness returned to the present world, he had faintly felt a few chaotic heavens, and there was not excluding those that he had not seen. In the past, the people who had ascended from Qinsong school might have landed in one of them. Moreover, this land could be said to be very similar to those few places, so there might be some connection between them. Now that it was said that they could actually be taken away, there was no doubt that there was one more place for him to explore. He said, "Other than I wonder if there are any guests here?" The man shook his head and said, "Ever since those elders were taken away, the two of us are the oldest here, and ever since we have been able to remember, we have never seen outsiders come here. However, there was once an elder who said that he wanted to go out to visit a friend. I don't know how he went out, but since then, we have never seen him again. Perhaps the two of them were not scheming, or perhaps they knew the power of his spirit refinement almighty being. They answered almost every question he asked and did not hide anything." When Zhang Yan heard this, he pondered for a moment. This place could be seen as a parasitic world in Busha heaven. Logically speaking, if one did not reach the spirit refinement realm, it would be impossible to leave. He believed that the dragon ancestor had such power, but listening to the words of the two of them, the person who left was just an ordinary ancestor, so there should be some way to go to other places, such as using some treasure, or waiting for the two worlds to meet, to go to Busha heaven. Of course, there was another possibility, and that was that there was a connection between Chaos Heaven, so he might be able to go to other places. At this moment, the girl standing beside the man said softly, "Our knowledge is shallow. If Tao Ancestor has any questions, you might as well go to the World Ancestor, he might be able to answer." The man also seemed to have thought of something and said, Yes, the World Ancestor should know." Zhang Yan looked at the sky and said, "The World Ancestor that the two of you are talking about, is it the dragon of this world?" The girl said, "Yes, the World Ancestor is the son of the Saint Ancestor, and this world is the incarnation of the World Ancestor." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Just now, he could already see that this world itself was formed from the body of a big dragon, and the dragon's eyes that hung high in the sky were its eyes, but ordinary people probably couldn't see it, nor could they talk to it. He said, "Thank you for telling me." After saying that, his consciousness moved, and he instantly appeared in front of a big dragon. The latter was originally in a deep sleep, but it suddenly woke up when it sensed the aura in front of it. In the blink of an eye, a wisp of cloud transformed into a middle-aged Taoist with a long beard, and he bowed and said, "Please forgive me for being rude, I didn't know that the Grand Supreme was here." From his words, Zhang Yan could tell that this person was indeed knowledgeable, so he said, "It's fine, how should I address you?" The middle-aged Taoist repeatedly said, "In front of the Grand Supreme, how dare you call yourself a fellow Taoist? You can just call me Shou Lang." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "I heard that you have an extraordinary background, you must know a lot?" Shou Lang hesitated and said carefully, "May I know what you want to ask, Grand Supreme?" Zhang Yan paused slightly and said, "I wonder if you have heard of the great underworld ancestor's name?" Shou Lang thought for a moment and shook his head. "Reporting to Grand Supreme, I have not heard of this name." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. He had now seen the truth. Although what this person said was not false, the actual situation was not like that. When the ancestral master's name was mentioned, a certain piece of Shou Lang's memory mysteriously disappeared. This meant that Shou Lang knew something before, or at the very least, had heard of it. However, he had forgotten about it after he asked about it. From the looks of it, this person would probably not be able to answer any question that involved his level. In that case, he would not be able to ask anything even if he continued. He nodded and said, "So you don't know either, sorry to disturb you." Shou Lang hurriedly said, "I don't dare, Grand Supreme." He hesitated for a moment and said, "Just now, I suddenly remembered that when my father left, he said that if there are foreign guests who come here in the future and ask me something I don't understand, please stay. When the opportunity comes, I will naturally explain." Zhang Yan thought about it. This should not have been because the dragon ancestor had predicted that he would come here, but because he knew what the person who came here would ask. From this, he could imagine that this place and other similar places must be related to something important. Although this place was connected to the door of the modern world, after he left, the connection would be broken again. Therefore, he did not know how long it would take for him to come here again. If his consciousness stayed here, he might be able to find out the answer. However, he was not prepared to do that. In the silence, there were still endless disputes because of the different Tao intents. Moreover, he did not know the background of this dragon ancestor. This time, he had only come here to try and inquire. There was no need to get too deeply involved. Moreover, he had previously calculated that in about 100 years, there would be another muddy sky that connected to the modern world. He could wait until then and go there to take a look. He said goodbye to Shou Lang, waved his sleeves, and retreated from this muddy sky. As soon as the virtual body returned, he saw the door close with a loud bang. When he sensed again, there was no trace of that place. It was clear that it had left Bu Shutian. He thought about it. This domain itself was not a fixed world. Normally, it would disappear in a flash, but it could survive after leaving Bu Shutian. Either it had set up a method that he was not aware of, or after leaving Bu Shutian, it had gone to other places similar to Bu Shutian. If he deduced from this, it would be very interesting. However, inspired by this, he could not help but have a thought. Could he also create a domain like this? After thinking about it, he felt that although it was impossible to do the exact same thing, it could be done in a similar place. As long as a square rose between the fixed world and Bu Shutian, like a place in the muddy sky, it could be used to travel between the two worlds. It would become an excellent place to avoid disasters. If one day the modern world was invaded by a powerful person from the outside, the disciples and sects of the same path could also hide in it. This was not him thinking too much, but no one knew the ability of the existence that had the ability to destroy everything. Even if it could not directly enter Bu Shutian, it was possible to invade this part of the modern world. Therefore, he needed to make arrangements in advance. Chapter 1980. After Zhang Yan came up with this idea, he first calculated and then decided to implement it. His consciousness turned and he first entered the world. He was born as a Taoist cultivator. Shen Chang, Chao Ying, and the other treasure spirits had never experienced the world of mortals, so they were fixed in a dull and lifeless state. However, his place was no different from the ordinary world of mortals. There were mountains and rivers, beautiful countries, plants, birds, and beasts. However, the living beings here were different from other places. Life and death had faded away. From the moment they were born, they were fixed in that moment. He casually intercepted a qi dynamic and took a strand of Bu Su Tian's Weili. He used his mana and made it fuse with each other. Then, with a push of his mind, a heaven appeared. This heaven could travel between the two worlds. It could be said that it fused with Bu Su and was also separated from Bu Su. It was somewhat similar to the Hun Tian. After doing this, he stretched out his hand and pointed at the real world that he created when he became a deity. In an instant, a door between the two worlds appeared. This world was constantly being maintained by his mana and had not collapsed yet. However, without a connection with a place like Bu Su Tian, which contained the essence of creation, it would eventually die. Among them, Wan Guang and the other sword attendant disciples were once his disciples, and they had contributed greatly during the battle between the three clans. It would be unfair for them to perish along with the present world, so he was prepared to bring them into this place. As long as they didn't perish in this world, they would be able to enjoy blessings and blessings. Wan Guang and the others were originally cultivating in the Forgotten Li Mountain when they felt a grand intent coming down from the sky. They immediately knew what they needed to do. He and the rest of the sword attendant disciples informed the disciples of the Forgotten Li Mountain and flew up into the sky. After a short while, they saw a realm gate in front of them. Just as the thought of crossing over rose in their minds, they felt like they had arrived at another world in a trance. When Zhang Yan saw that they had entered, he sent out another decree, ordering them to set up an abode of immortals cave here. Then he stopped looking and returned his will to the Qinghuan Palace. Then, he tried to calculate whether this world would be exposed under the invasion of external forces. As he was calculating, Jing Yu entered the hall and reported, "Master, Zhang Shangzhen has come to visit." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Just call her in." After a short rest, Zhang Zhen entered the main hall. She bowed and said, "Greetings, big brother. Little sister wishes big brother success." Zhang Yan gestured with his hand and said with a smile, Little sister, you don't have to be so polite. Let's sit down and talk. Zhang Jin brushed her sleeves and sat down beside him. Brother and sister chatted about their parting, after which Zhang Jin said softly, "There's something I need to tell you, elder brother. Years ago, the various sects and clans of the 9 continents followed you to the mountain and sea realm. Not too long ago, I used the magic of karma to perform augury, and discovered that quite a few of them were descendants of second brother. I chose one of them as an apprentice, and accepted him as my apprentice. Elder brother, do you have any instructions for me?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't have any instructions. Little sister, just do as you see fit." He looked at Zhang Zhen and asked, "Little sister, you seem to have something on your mind?" Zhang Zhen did not hide anything. She nodded and said, "I can't hide it from you." Before her master, Pang Yunxiang, was reincarnated, she had repeatedly urged her to find a way to make the sect more prosperous. She could say that she had done it, but she could also say that she had not. Her current cultivation had surpassed that of the founder. Under her painstaking efforts, the Inanna Temple was now one of the major sections. It could be said that it was one of the most powerful sects apart from the 4 major sections. But at the same time, the 4 major sects had become more prosperous than before. This was the difference in resources. It was like comparing a lake and an ocean. With the same opportunity, the major sects would gain more. What she could not let go of the most was that she was the only one in the Anatta Temple who had reached the level of mortal transformation. None of the disciples in the younger generation had the hope to achieve this state. If the sect stopped at this level in the future, then the distance between them and the 4 major sects would only get further and further. As time passed, the other sects would eventually catch up with them. Zhang Yan could tell what she was worried about. He smiled and said, "The difference in the Inanna Temple is just a matter of martial arts. If you are interested, I can give you a martial art." Zhang Jin said seriously, "I understand. This is something that you can do casually. I'm not pretentious. It would be great if I could get your help. But I also know that everything has a cause and an effect. I have already received your favor last time, and I don't know when I can return it. You have already left the mortal world, so there is no problem with this. But I have to think for the sect. Moreover, if the Anatta Temple were to cultivate external martial arts, then it would not be the Anatta Temple anymore. So I can only thank you for your kindness." Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, "You can understand this, and that means you have a deep understanding of Tao." The prosperity of the various sects did not come out of nowhere. They were left behind by the predecessors. Now that the Inanna Temple is prosperous, it is far better than the past. You have already surpassed the predecessors, so why do you have to be depressed? When your cultivation improves again, you will be able to live forever. As long as I am still here, I will be able to protect the living beings in this world. You only need to follow Tao and keep your heart of Tao. Then you will see something." Zhang Ji pondered for a moment and stood up. She bowed to her seat and said, "Little sister thanks elder brother for your guidance." In the land of Kunshi, Lu Yeni sat in the cave residence and was quietly observing the mystery. After receiving the instruction from Zhang Yan, she was paying attention to the reincarnations of her 2 junior apprentice sisters, Wang Kaiwei and Wang Kading. In fact, she did not have the instruction. She had been paying attention to these 2 junior apprentice sisters from the same sect, but they did not have the qualifications to enter Tao. There was no benefit in entering the sect, so she had to wait for a suitable opportunity. The Wang sisters were first born in the 9 cities, but after so many reincarnations, they were no longer in this place. The 2 of them were originally sisters, and they cultivated under the same master. Naturally, there was a cause and effect between them. Although they were separated in the reincarnation cycle, they were either neighbors or relatives. They were never completely separated from each other. In this reincarnation, the 2 of them became sisters again. They were born in the family of Duke Fu, the Wei family. They were called Wei Wan and Wei Jiao. The state of Fu used to be the Bai tribe. To repay the kindness of the Ji family, just now the name was changed to Fu, and the king took Fu as his surname. On this day, it was the Lullaby Festival in the capital. Whether it was the nobles or the commoners, as long as they were young men and women, they would go for a walk outside the city walls. The nobles were different from the commoners. They lined up in carriages, sprinkled water and flower petals along the way, and there were guards in the sky and on the ground. After leaving the city, they first paid respects to deity Ingshi. Then, they came to the lake, set up their tents, and watched the dance. The second son of the king, Fu Kan, was sitting on a temporary platform, drinking with the servants from time to time. At this moment, he heard laughter and looked over. He was immediately attracted by it. He saw 7 to 8 girls walking over. Among them, there were 2 girls with skin like jade, bright eyes, and white teeth. They were exceptionally radiant. They were beauties that he had never seen in his life. He was stunned, and he did not even notice that his wine cup was tilted and wet his sleeves. He could not help but ask, "Which family are they?" The servant beside him whispered, "Young master, they are the Wei sisters." "They are the Wei sisters?" Fu Kan revealed a surprised expression. He had heard of the beauty of the Wei sisters before, but it was common for the nobles to boast to each other, so he had never taken it to heart. Now that he saw them, he felt that the words he had heard in the past were not enough to describe the beauty of the 2 sisters. He could not help but exclaim, "I never thought that there would be such colors in our country. They can be called the twin jades of the country." The servant instigated, "It is said that the parents of the Wei sisters are not around, and they were raised by their aunt. However, their aunt recently remarried to the Silver Duke, and she intended to marry the sisters first. If young master is willing—" Before he could finish, a shout came from the side. "Ridiculous!" A middle-aged official stood up in anger, pointed at him and said, "Are you trying to harm young master?" The servant was stunned and said, "Why does Du Kuang say so?" Du Kuang bowed to Fu Kan and said seriously, "The 2 girls are beautiful, and not only are they famous in the country, they have also heard of them in Zhaoyuan. You can accept them, I can accept them, but young master alone cannot. If young master hears of this, he will definitely spread the news, and young master will not be able to escape the reputation of being a beauty lover. Then after 100 years, will the king choose a person who chases after beauty to be the king?" Fu Kan was shocked, and he lowered his head to think and said, "Du Kuang is right." He sighed with regret, "Let's drop this matter." Du Kuang saw that he was reluctant to part and frowned. He took a step forward and said in a low voice, "Young master looks at the beauty of the 2 girls, but in this subordinate's opinion, they are the source of disaster. If we keep them, there is a risk of disaster for the country. It is better to send them to Zhaoyuan." This. Fu Kan was indeed a little reluctant. He wanted to become the monarch before taking in the 2 sisters. But when he heard this, it wasn't good for him to not respond. He closed his eyes and only opened them after a long while. He calmly said, "I'll leave this matter to Du Kuang." The Wei sisters did not know that their fate had been decided by someone else. Even though they were in the family of an official and had no one to rely on, they had no ability to make their own decisions. After a few months, the king issued an edict to send the 2 sisters to the faraway Mi country of Zhaoyuan. Once the edict was issued, almost without a moment's pause, there were 1,000 soldiers and cultivators escorting the 2 sisters on their way. In the carriage, Wei Wan was holding a silk scroll, and with the light from the pearls on the table, she was engrossed in reading it. Wei Jiao came over and asked curiously, "Is sister reading a Taoist book?" Wei Wan closed the scroll and sighed, "It's not a Taoist book." "Little sister, you also know that other than the breathing technique that Elder Ji taught me, he did not allow us to read anything else. This is only related to a biography of the immortals and gods. 2 years ago, the 2 of them were fortunate enough to cultivate with the Ji clan. However, although the Ji clan treated them favorably, they were not allowed to call the Ji clan master, nor did they teach them any Taoist techniques. Instead, they were taught a Qi cultivation method. They persevered and felt their strength gradually increase, but other than this, there was nothing else. Not to mention that they did not have the ability to drive a tiger into the sky, let alone the immortals and gods in the sky." Wei Xian moved closer to the carriage window and lifted the corner of the curtain to look at the cultivators riding on birds and heads. She said with infinite yearning, if I had learned Taoist techniques back then, I would not have had to go with the flow. I could have been like them, roaming the sky and riding the wind. Wei Wan said, I always felt that there was a reason why Elder Ji did not call us anything. Wei Xian pouted and said, Elder Ji might have gone senile. Wei Wan said seriously, don't say that. Wei Xian stuck out her tongue and said, I know. Wei Wan sighed and said, even if we ran away, the world is so big, where could we go? Wei Xian sat back on the soft couch and placed her hands on it. Her legs swayed back and forth lightly and she said thoughtfully, this must be the binding of the mortal world that Elder Ji spoke of. I did not notice it in the past, but this kind of feeling really makes one unable to feel happy. At this moment, they heard the voice of a young man outside, laughing lightly, since you don't like it, why not break out of the cage and follow me to be free and unfettered? Wouldn't that be great? Chapter 1981. Who's there? Wei Jiao walked forward in surprise. She lifted the curtain and saw no one outside. The closest guards were 10 steps away and no one was near the carriage. She looked left and right but did not see anyone. Just as she was feeling puzzled, she heard a voice coming from the left. Here, here. She looked towards the source of the voice and was surprised to find a little person about the length of a finger standing on her shoulder. He had a smiling face, red lips, and white teeth. He was wearing an embroidered robe and a jade belt. He looked very delicate. She couldn't help but widen her eyes and asked curiously, where did this little person come from? Wei Wan revealed a vigilant expression and said, who are you? Why are you in our carriage for no reason? Although they were young, only 13 or 14 years old, they were used to seeing strange people and strange things. Although this little person's body didn't look big, from his voice and appearance, it was clearly a young man. She couldn't help but be on guard. The little person took out a folding fan from his sleeve and opened it. He said in a leisurely manner, my name is Jayo. Do the two ladies have any worries in your hearts? As long as you say it out loud, I will be able to resolve your worries. Wei Jiao found it interesting and secretly reached out to catch him. The little person sighed and said, wait, wait. He jumped and avoided being caught. He landed on the table at the side. Wei Wan felt that this person was not simple. She pulled Wei Jiao 2 steps back and stared at him. What do you want? The little person said innocently, why are you asking me? If the two of you didn't call for me, why would I come here? Wei Jiao put her hands behind her back and bent down to look at him. When she got a little closer, she suddenly stretched out a finger to point at him. However, the little person dodged it and shook his head at her. Wei Jiao pursed her lips and said, all right, you said you can resolve people's worries. Then tell me, what are your abilities? The little person jumped onto the brush stand and sat down. He waved his folding fan and said while shaking his head, I can go up to the sky and pluck the stars. I can also go down to the sea and catch the whales. I can determine good and bad luck and can hear sounds from thousands of miles away. I have all kinds of celestial methods and there is no way to describe them in detail here. Wei Jiao lightly snorted and said, I don't believe it. Her bright eyes turned as she said, why don't you show us your skills? The little man closed his fan and said, sure. He pointed the fan handle at the table and said, please take a look at this incense burner. The object he was pointing at was a gold, copper, and silver-threaded cloud child cauldron. Its shape was exquisite, and its surface was inlaid with silver. There were delicate and vivid patterns of flowers, birds, fishes, and insects. Sandalwood smoke curled out, and when it reached 3 feet, there was a ring that wrapped around it, showing the appearance of a cloud Ganoderma. It was a rare treasure, and it was their accompanying gift to Zhao Yuan this time. The Wei sisters saw that a sparrow on top of the incense burner suddenly came to life after the little person muttered a few words. It jumped down from above and chirped twice on the table. Then, it broke through the curtains and flapped its wings to fly away. Wei Jiao was surprised at first. Then, she looked at the sparrow flying into the distant sky with a look of yearning and envy on her face. The little person puffed out his chest and said proudly, "What do you think?" Wei Jiao came back to her senses and asked, "With your abilities, can you teach us sisters?" "About this?" The little person laughed and said, "It's not impossible. If the two of you are willing to go with me, I can naturally teach you these small techniques." Wei Jiao was about to speak, but Wei Wan didn't wait for her to finish and pulled her back a little. She took a few steps back and said in a low voice, "Sister, don't believe his words. This person's origin is unknown, how can you just follow him?" Wei Jiao giggled and said in a low voice, "I didn't believe him, I just watched for fun. If we can learn this little person's skills, no one will be able to keep an eye on us. Sister, are you not tempted?" Wei Wan shook her head and said firmly, "Unorthodox Tao techniques are not the right path, so it's fine if we don't learn them. Once we leave this place, it's still the wilderness, and there's no place for us to stay. Moreover, Aunt once said that the human heart is more sinister than the world. This person came looking for us for no reason, but he still refuses to tell us his origin. He most likely has a purpose, so we can't be fooled." Wei Jiao secretly laughed at her sister for being too timid, but it wasn't that she didn't argue. She blinked and said, "Sister, don't be anxious. Let little sister try him again." She walked forward again and said, "You little person, you said you would bring me out, but there are so many guards outside, how can we let them go?" The little person said proudly, "Since I can come in, I can also go out. Don't the two of you want to learn my skills?" He took out a big bowl from his sleeve and placed it in front of the two of them. The bowl was filled with water, and it looked extremely clear. There was also a dark green tea leaf floating in the air. "As long as the two of you drink this spiritual tea, you can become the same size as me." He pursed his lips and whistled again. The bird that had flown out just now flew back. He pointed with his folding fan proudly, "Later, I will enlighten a few more birds from this furnace. Then I can ride on the birds and fly away. From then on, I will be free." Wei Jiao looked at the bird that had been called back. She didn't know why, but she was a little unhappy. She said in a low voice, "So, you also don't feel free." At this time, Wei Wan sat back down and said calmly, "If Sire does this, I'm afraid we still won't be able to get out." The little person was surprised and asked, "Why?" Wei Wan said, "Sire has the ability to come in, but if I go out, there is a victory bird standing on the roof of the carriage. The moment we leave the carriage, it will let out a cry." The little person said, "That's easy." He then took out 2 hand scissors made of paper. With a shake of his hand, they fell to the ground and transformed into 2 people who looked just like the Wei sisters. Their expressions were a little stiff, but if one didn't look at them closely, they wouldn't be able to find any flaws. At this time, Wei Wan said in a low voice, "Sister, this person came prepared. He is clearly coming for us 2 sisters." Wei Jiao also nodded. Seeing the 2 of them hesitating, the little person said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "What, could it be that the 2 of you are unwilling?" Wei Jiao tilted her head and thought for a while. She asked, "If I drink this water, can I change back?" The little person laughed and said, "Of course I can. But what's wrong with being a little person?" He took out a flower seed from his pocket and said, "Look at this seed. I only need to eat one and it's equivalent to a meal. An ordinary fruit can provide me with a month's worth of food. The ferocious birds and beasts in the wilderness look down on me because I'm small. Not only do I not need to work hard for a living, there are also no external enemies to disturb me. It's much more free and unfettered than you people struggling in the human world." Wei Jiao said, "Allow me to discuss this with sister." The little person said, "Then I'll wait." Wei Jiao said softly, "Sister, this person is lying. What do you think?" Wei Wan said, "No matter what, that water definitely can't be drunk." Wei Jiao said, "I'm afraid that if we don't go with him now, he has a way to capture us." Wei Wan said, "I'll use words to calm him down. Sister, you go pull the golden bell and let the guards deal with this person." The little person sighed and said, "Originally, if you drank this water, we could still talk nicely. Why must I use force? What a spoiler." He waved his folding fan and a gust of black wind came out. The 2 sisters swayed and fell on the bed. He then made a hand sign and 2 bowls of water flew up. They turned into smoke and entered their ears. Soon after, the 2 of them became the same size as him. With a stomp of their feet, white smoke rose and carried the 3 of them away. The moment he went out, there was a loud and clear bird's cry coming from the top of the carriage. The guards were immediately alerted and gathered around. The little person was also nervous. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He grabbed a handful of golden sand and threw it outside. In a split second, it turned into endless sand and blocked everyone's sight. He took the opportunity to escape. The Fu kingdom was alone in the wilderness. The mutant magicians in the kingdom were quite outstanding, and they also had magic tools bestowed by the divine monarch. He originally thought that he would have to spend a lot of effort to escape, but he didn't expect that it would be so smooth this time. He didn't know why. He was pleasantly surprised and didn't think too much about it. After 10 days, he flew back to his lair and landed in a narrow cave that was cut into the mountain wall. After a few days, the Wei sisters woke up one after another. They found themselves in a strange place. In front of them was a bronze cauldron. The little person was looking at the cauldron while they were tied up with thin ropes. Wei Jiao, however, wasn't afraid at all. She asked, "What kind of place is this?" The little person looked at her in surprise. "You woke up so quickly, but this is good." He chuckled and said, "You two sisters are born to be intelligent and have cultivated the righteous Taoist technique. You have a pure body and can be the catalyst for my cauldron of pills. Previously, I couldn't do anything to you two sisters in the kingdom. I didn't expect that the idiot in your kingdom would send you 2 cultivation seeds to another kingdom. It's a good thing for me. When I achieve the Taoist body, I will naturally remember your benefits." Wei Jiao looked at the cauldron and said, "We two sisters have studied under Elder Ji. If you dare to harm us, Elder Ji won't let you go." "Uncle Ji of the Fu Kingdom?" The little person was shocked and his expression changed several times. He didn't expect the two sisters to have such a background. He couldn't help but reveal a struggling expression, but then he became ferocious. "So what if he's Uncle Ji? The wasteland is so big. After I refine the two of you, I will find a demon king to rely on. How will he find me then?" At this moment, a hollow sound came from the cauldron. The little person became excited and danced beside the cauldron. He clapped his hands and sang a strange song. The two sisters' bodies floated up involuntarily and slowly moved towards the cauldron. Wei Jiao couldn't help but turn pale. She struggled a few times, but after realizing that it was useless, she angrily said, "Sister, we might not be able to escape this time. I would rather die than be eaten by the monsters." Wei once said sadly, "Elder Ji once said that if I can improve my Taoist technique, I will be able to open up a miracle. If we sisters are more diligent, we might be able to escape this disaster today." Wei Jiao's eyes were red. She said, "Sister, if there's a chance to escape, I will definitely train hard from now on." The little person heard her and laughed. Just as he was about to mock her, a voice came from outside the cauldron. "Since the two senior sisters have such a wish, how can I not fulfill it?" The little person was shocked. He looked outside and said, "Who is it?" Outside the cave, a wisp of smoke rushed in and a majestic white jade lion came in. On its back sat a handsome young Taoist. He came down from the lion but did not look at the little person. He bowed to the two sisters and said, "Greetings, senior apprentice sisters. Junior apprentice brother greets you." Chapter 1982. As soon as the young Taoist entered, a gentle manna was emitted. The Wei sisters who were flying towards the cauldron were immediately stopped, and then they were slowly put down. The little person was disrupted, and his head swelled. He was furious and scolded, "Where did this wild Taoist come from? How dare you ruin my plans?" The young Taoist glanced at him and sneered, "You're just a mountain spirit, how dare you make a ruckus in front of me?" As he spoke, he waved his sleeve, and the little person was swept away by a gust of wind. He was immediately suppressed by a surge of mana, and his limbs were spread out on the ground, unable to move. He could not speak, and only his eyeballs could be seen moving around. At this moment, the ropes on the Wei sisters fell. They had just recovered from their shock, and after sorting out their emotions, they looked at the Taoist. Strangely, they had never seen this person before, but at this moment, he gave them a sense of familiarity. Wei Wan took a few steps forward and bowed. she said gratefully, "Thank you for saving us. How should I address you?" The young Taoist smiled. "Senior sister, you don't have to be so polite. My name in this life is Zhen Xiao." Wei Wan thought for a while and said, "I'm afraid you're mistaken. We sisters are the daughters of Fu Guo's Duke Wei. We have never traveled far in our lives. I'm afraid we're not the senior sisters that you're talking about." Zhen Xiao smiled and said, "Senior sisters, you don't have to worry. You just haven't awakened your memories from your previous lives, so I'm afraid you still don't recognize me." His previous life was Fu Baoxing. When he was in the Dongsheng continent, he grew up under the wings of the Wang sisters. He was very close to them, so this time, he received Lu Yinyi's care and specially came to welcome the Wei sisters back to their sect. However, rashly receiving them might not be a good thing for the two of them. When a reincarnated disciple entered the sect, not only did they have to have the fate of Tao, they also had to have the Tao heart. Before the Wei sisters awakened the memories of their previous lives, they had focused on this life. Even after they were awakened, it was impossible for them to completely deny the experiences of this life. Coincidentally, this phase was also the extremely important foundation establishment phase. This involved how far a cultivator could go on the path of Tao. In this life, the two sisters were born in a court official's family. They were used to a life of luxury and rarely suffered hardship. Therefore, in this place, they needed to temper their mental state. Originally, under Lu Yinyi's orders, he would make appropriate arrangements, but he didn't expect that the two sisters would attract the attention of demons, so he didn't have to do so deliberately. After experiencing a life and death crisis, it was as if the two scribes' hearts had gone through a round of tempering, which was extremely beneficial for their future cultivation. Past life memories? Wei Jiao was surprised and said, "Taoist priest, are you saying that we sisters and you are from the same sect?" Zhen Xiao said, "Yes." The two sisters looked at each other in disbelief. Although this was their first time meeting Zhen Xiao, they inexplicably trusted him and were willing to believe his words. Wei Jiao had a lively temperament and quickly accepted this explanation. She curiously asked, "Taoist Zhen, that demon said that he wanted us sisters to have a pure body so that he could use it to refine medicine. What is this all about?" Zhen Xiao said, "This is because the two senior sisters are cultivating a superior Taoist technique, which is indeed a great tonic for the demon. That's why this demon coveted you." Now that Kunshi continent was flourishing because of the people's prosperity, Taoist techniques were gradually reviving. The demons also learned a lot and began to pay attention to cultivation. However, most of these people were born with insufficient foundation tools. They could only find a cultivator who cultivated a superior Taoist technique and refine it into a pill to make up for their deficiency. As for people like the Wei sisters who only knew how to cultivate but didn't have any protective spells, they were the best medicine for them. Wei Wan said, "Is Taoist priests mistaken? We sisters only cultivated some breathing techniques." Zhen Xiao smiled and said, "Senior sisters, your technique must have been taught by the Ji family, right?" Zhen Wan couldn't help but nod and asked in surprise, "How did you know?" Zhen Xiao said, "Back then, the Ji family was taken care of by our master. When she saw the two senior sisters, she calculated the cause and effect. In order to repay this favor, she taught you this orthodox Taoist technique. This is also a common thing in the Shenmen." Speaking of this, he paused for a moment. "It's okay if you two senior sisters don't understand what I'm saying now. As long as you follow me back to the mountains to cultivate, you'll understand everything when your past experiences are restored. Of course, if you two senior sisters aren't willing, I can also escort you back to the mortal world." Wei Wan thought about it. According to what Zhen Xiao said, if she could be used as a tonic by the demon, then even if she went to Zhao Yuan, she wouldn't necessarily be able to live a stable life. Moreover, apart from this, they were just weak girls without any supernatural powers or spells. Their fates could only be entrusted to others. She had seen a lot of strange stories and was deeply interested in those immortals who could fly in the sky and burrow into the earth. She was very willing to follow Zhen Xiao, but she had a calm temperament and didn't immediately make a decision. She asked softly, "Sister, what do you think?" Wei Jiao had experienced a life and death crisis and understood that she was weak. She didn't want to be manipulated by others anymore. She immediately said, "Elder sister, what can we do in Zhao Yuan? Not to mention living under someone else's roof, we might even be given away like goods. It's better to follow Taoist priests and back to cultivate. Even if we have to eat the wind and drink the dew every day, I'll accept it." Sun Shao couldn't help but laugh. "Senior sisters, don't worry. Even if we go back to the mountains, we won't have to eat the wind and drink the dew. However, senior sister is right. As long as we are in this world and haven't transcended, we will either be eaten by demons or eaten by humans. This is the binding of the mortal world." When the two sisters heard this, they both looked pensive. Sun Shao looked at the little person and waved his hand, taking it into his palm. He then tapped the space between its eyebrows and instantly turned it into a wooden puppet with complete facial features. He said, "Little brother won't deal with this mountain spirit on your behalf. Senior sisters, it's up to you whether you want to kill it or let it go." As he said this, he pushed the person forward. Wei Jiao was very bold. She took it and pinched the little person's nose hard. She snorted and said, "I'm going to teach it a good lesson when we go back." Sun Shao said, "Senior sisters, please follow me." He held the jade white lion with his left hand and turned around to walk outside. The Wei sisters followed him out of the cave and immediately discovered that the world outside had become incomparably vast. It was as if everything had been magnified dozens of times. Sun Shao took out 2 medicinal pills from his sleeve and said, "Senior sisters, you've been poisoned by that mountain spirit's abnormality powder. You've become the same size as it. As long as you take these pills, you'll be able to change back to your original appearance." The 2 sisters each took a pill, covered their faces with their sleeves, and swallowed the pills. Immediately, they felt their minds become absent-minded. They found themselves standing at the edge of a cliff. If they took another 2 steps, they'd be in a bottomless abyss. They couldn't help but feel their minds shake. However, the 2 of them had cultivated for 2 years. Although their faces turned pale when they saw this scene, their feet firmly nailed to the ground as if they were rooted to the ground. Sun Shao looked at them and nodded inwardly. He said, "Senior sisters, please get on my mount's back." The Wei sisters looked over and saw that the jade white lion was currently standing on clouds and was suspended in midair. Wei Jiao was very bold. Without saying anything, she took a few steps forward and grabbed the jade white lion's mane. Before she could exert any strength, she felt a force supporting her and she sat sideways on the lion's broad back. She patted the lion and called out, "Big sister, come here quickly." Wei Wan nodded lightly. She cautiously took a few steps forward. Once she grabbed the lion's mane, she felt her body become weak. Then, she found herself sitting together with Wei Jiao. Sun Shao said, "Senior sisters, sit tight." He took a step forward and instantly soared into the clouds. The jade white lion also carried the 2 of them and spread its wings to follow. At first, the Wei sisters were still a little nervous. However, when they realized that there was a force supporting them on the lion's back, they didn't have to worry about falling. Thus, they relaxed. The 2 of them looked at the flowing river below them. It was as if the river had cut a zigzag white line on the ground. The mountains were shaped like wrinkled silk, and countless plants covered their field of vision like thick green velvet. This was a scene that they'd never seen before. At the same time, they felt a sense of novelty. At the same time, they were secretly envious of the ability to fly with the wind and roam the universe. After flying for half a day, they saw a floating altar in the sky. There was a drum and a bell hanging from it. It was grand and imposing. Sun Shao explained, "This is a transfer array altar set up by the various sects in the 9 provinces. We can go to the White Mang Mountain Manor with this." When the Taoist on duty on the array altar saw that it was Sun Shao, he hurriedly removed the restriction on the altar and allowed him to enter. Sun Shao nodded at him and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." The Taoist looked flattered and said, "You're welcome, you're welcome." When Wei Wan saw this scene, she thought, "It seems that this Taoistson is also a person with a high status among the immortals." As the cultivators of the various heavens came to the Kunshi continent to open up caves and impart Taoist techniques, The various countries of the human Tao gradually understood the situation of cultivators. However, other than the four great Yuanzun, the only ones who were truly familiar with them were the cultivators who had more contact with the various countries. As for the rest, they didn't know much. At this time, a light curtain suddenly rose above the altar, and the jade white lion passed through it. In the eyes of the two sisters, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed, and a big clear lake appeared in front of them. When they looked again, this lake was situated on top of a mountain, and the surroundings were covered in white snow. There were herons circling above the lake, and they would let out a cry from time to time. Sun Shao said, "This is the White Mang Mountain." Wei Wan asked, "Taoistsen, what kind of person is your senior sister?" Sun Shao smiled and said, "It's not convenient for me to say. It's just that under Master's command, senior sister's cultivation is the highest. Senior sister is also in charge of all matters in the sect." While they were talking, the jade white lion had already reached the surface of the lake. However, it didn't stop and plunged headlong into the lake. The two sisters first felt that there was no sound in their ears. Then, their eyes suddenly opened, and all kinds of sounds came back together. They found themselves in a spacious water manor. The walls were embedded with brilliant pearls, and there were exquisite stone pillars supporting them everywhere. Sun Shao pulled the jade white lion to the ground and said, "Senior sisters, follow me to pay respects to Master first. Then, we'll pay senior sister a visit." At this moment, a female disciple in a light yellow dress walked over. She bowed to him and said, "Martial Uncle Tsin and Martial Uncles, please follow me." Sun Shao said, "Thank you, Martial Nephew." The female disciple said, "You're welcome." The female disciple led the way. Following the formation door, they soon arrived in front of a majestic hall. Then they stopped and stood to one side. Sun Shao, on the other hand, greeted them and led the way sisters inside. Once inside, they saw a memorial tablet enshrined at the top, with the words, "Grand Supreme Tao Lord of Han Tian Wu Xian Yuan Yu Huan," written on it. Wei Wan had always been a calm person. When she saw this memorial tablet, she couldn't help but ask, "Taoistsen, could the master that you're talking about be one of the four great Yuanzun, the Xianyuan holy man?" Sun Shao smiled and said, "That's what outsiders call him. Master is the Taishang Taoist Lord. The Yuanzun of this world is one of Master's countless incarnations." He walked forward and kowtowed to the memorial tablet. Then he said, "Senior sisters, since you've seen Master's memorial tablet, why don't you come forward to pay your respects?" Chapter 1983. The beginning of the heavens was the title given to the spirit refinement almighty beings who had transcended beyond the mortal world. Zhang Yan's original title also included the word Dian, but the disciples in the sect did not want to use his name, so they omitted it when worshipping him. The Wei sisters did not expect that the Master Sun Shao spoke of had such a great background. After paying their respects in a daze, the female disciple arranged for them to stay in a large and spacious abode for the night. Even after a long time, the two still did not come back to their senses. Suddenly, Wei Jiao grabbed her sister's arm and shook it vigorously. She said excitedly, "Sister, sister, our master is Xianyuan Tao Lord." Wei Wan was shaken so much that she could not sit still. She looked at her sister reproachfully, but then her expression changed and she solemnly corrected her sister. "It's the Taishang Tao ancestor, sister, don't say it wrong." Wei Jiao nodded and said, "I know." Wei Wan put her hand on her chest and let out a sigh of relief. Although she said so, she still felt a little uncertain in her heart. She was even a little worried that this was just an illusion. She did not know what kind of realm the Taishang Tao ancestor was, nor did she have such a concept, but she knew about Xianyuan Tao Lord. In the legends of the human path, the four great creators, Yuanzun, were the beginning of the heavens. Everything in the world was created by the four of them. They were the origin of all Taoism in the world. They lived high above the heavens and did not connect with the people of the world. Even the heavenly God Emperor only managed the world on behalf of the four of them. For them, this was really too far away. But now she was actually told that her master in her previous life was one of them, Yuanzun. She already felt that the ordinary cultivators were unreachable, let alone a Tao Lord? She really did not dare to believe this. The two of them could not calm their minds for a long time, but they heard a voice coming from outside. "Are the two uncle masters in?" Wei Wan immediately came back to her senses. She stood up from the soft couch, tidied her makeup and clothes, and said, "Come in." The curtain was lifted, and it was the female disciple who came in. She bowed to the two of them and said, "Greetings to the two uncle masters." After that, she moved aside, and 8 maids walked in with a brocade tray. On the tray, there were a few sets of clothes and a dressing case. There were also glass pots, cups, and many other miscellaneous items. Wei Jiao caressed the cloth and found that it was smooth and exquisite without any stitches. It was far superior to the Fu Kingdom's weaver. She couldn't help but click her tongue in wonder. The female disciple said, "This is the rainbow-colored silk robe. The color of the robe is naturally woven from the 7-colored silk that the silkworm spits out. It's one and the same, and it can resist water and fire weapons." As she spoke, she held up a pair of bracelets. As she moved, a crisp sound rang out. This pair of bracelets can calm one's mind and repel evil spirits. If the two martial uncles encounter the mountain spirits and monsters again, you won't have to be afraid. After putting it down, she pointed to the last brocade tray. There are 2 cosmos sachets here, and they can contain anything. There are 3 stacks of treasured talismans inside, and each has its own use. If the two martial uncles have any personal belongings, they can all be stored inside. There's no need to put them elsewhere. Wei Wan looked over and saw that every item could be called a treasure. However, she also knew that since she had entered the immortal sect, these things were presumably normal. She looked at the female disciple and asked, "May I know how to address this female immortal?" The female disciple took a step back and bowed slightly. "I don't dare to be addressed like this by the two martial uncles. Disciple's name is Qiao Jing, and I'm just a registered disciple under teacher." Wei Wan pondered for a moment and said, "Taoist Qiao Jing, us sisters have just entered this place, and there are many things we don't understand. We need to consult you." Qiao Jing said, "I don't dare. If martial uncles have any doubts, feel free to ask." Wei Wan walked forward and gently pulled her to sit down. Then, she started to inquire about the various matters in White Radiance Water Manor. Qiao Jing answered patiently. It didn't take long for Wei Wan to understand the various titles here, the relationship between the upper and lower levels in the manor, and even the cultivation realms. Qiao Jing saw that it was already late, so she stood up and said, "It's already late, so I won't disturb the two martial uncles' rest any longer. There are books behind the wall. You two martial uncles can browse as you please." Wei Wan also stood up and said apologetically, "That's fine too. Taoist Qiao Jing also needs to cultivate. I'm really sorry for disturbing you for so long today." Qiao Jing repeatedly said that it was fine. After she bid farewell, 2 maids came forward and asked softly, "Does honored guest want to take a bath?" The Wei sisters had long cultivated to the pure body, and could be said to have jade bones and ice muscles. Their bodies were untainted by dust, but after being captured by the demons, some corners of their clothes were worn out, so they had to be changed eventually. Therefore, they followed the maids to the earth-fire hot spring in the back room to wash up, and then took a short rest. When they came out, they only felt that their fatigue was gone, and they had regained their original spirit. Wei Jiao, however, didn't forget that mountain spirit. She found a few small needles and ruthlessly pricked the little person's body. Then, she placed it on a seat of a shrine and made a face at it. Wei Wan didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her own younger sister's actions. She lightly shook her head and moved forward. She went around a screen and walked into a corridor inlaid with glazed jade walls. She saw colorful fish swimming back and forth on both sides, and she was amazed. She stopped for a moment and just past this place, she came to a study room at the side. Immediately, she smelled a faint sandalwood fragrance, and her mind instantly became clear. She looked over and saw that the long table on the brush stand was well arranged. Soft brocade was laid out at the bottom, and bundles of jade scrolls were placed on the simple and unadorned bookshelves. There was a pearl lamp stand in the corner, illuminating the place with a magnificent radiance. She took a few steps forward and knelt down in front of the table. She took the bundle of jade scrolls closest to her eyes and slowly opened it. She discovered that it was a scroll of Taoist techniques that described how to move things. She couldn't help but feel surprised. Her eyes turned. The jade scrolls were placed very casually, which meant that they weren't valuable at all. Then, the things recorded in the jade scrolls must be similar. She thought to herself, as expected of the Taoist ancestors' disciples. Just a random study room has so many secret Taoist techniques. She carefully looked at the scroll in front of her. She tried to hold the spell according to the scroll and only felt her breath move. The things on the table suddenly shook, and the curtain in the distance fluttered. Then she felt a tightness in her chest, as if all the strength in her body had been sucked out. She and Wei Jiao had only cultivated for 2 years. Although their foundation was laid, it was still far from the time to cultivate the profound Taoist techniques. At least, they had to enter the realm of qi cultivation. Forcefully cultivating would only result in twice the effort with half the result. She knew her limits. Seeing that it was inappropriate, she didn't continue. She immediately closed the scroll and didn't look at it anymore. She went to the praying mat and breathed in and out for a while. Then she returned to her bed and slept. The night passed, and the 2 sisters woke up early in the morning. After washing up and dressing themselves in front of the mirror, a maid came to serve them medicinal pills, tea, and honey jujube pills. Wei Wan picked up a pill and swallowed it with water. She suddenly felt a cooling sensation enter her stomach, and her mind became clear. Her slight hunger also disappeared. Wei Jiao also swallowed a pill, but she sighed in disappointment. Wei Wan asked curiously, "Why is sister sighing?" Wei Jiao said, "I was thinking if I only eat pills in the future, will I not be able to eat those delicacies?" Wei Wan glared at her, then she said in a serious tone, "The essence of water and grains is only used after birth, so it's hard to avoid it being polluted. How can it compare to eating the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth? Sister is a cultivator in the future, so you must control your desires. Don't play around and enjoy life." Wei Jiao was most afraid of her lecturing, so she hugged her arm and leaned against her. She shook her body and said, all right, I'll listen to sister." At this moment, a maid came up and said, "Taoistsen is here." Wei Wan hurriedly said, "Please come in." After a while, Sun Shao came in and raised his hand to greet them. He said, "Senior sisters, did you enjoy your stay here?" Wei Wan bowed in return and said, "Thank you for your concern, Taoist. Last night, we 2 sisters had a good rest." Sun Shao smiled and said, "If it's convenient for you 2 sisters, please follow me to greet eldest senior sister." Wei Wan nodded in agreement. She gave Wei Jiao a few more serious reminders and told her what she needed to pay attention to before following Sun Shao out. After passing through a few teleportation formations, the 3 of them arrived at a cave residence. The 2 sisters walked in, and when they looked up, they saw a woman dressed in a white Taoist robe sitting beside a pond. Her long hair was tied up with a silver ring, and her eyes were as clear as water. For some reason, when the 2 sisters saw her for the first time, they felt a sense of reverence, but there was also a sense of closeness mixed within. Sun Shao came forward and greeted, "Greetings, senior sister." The Wei sisters also came forward and bowed, saying, "Greetings, Lu Shangzhen." They felt a little uneasy. After talking with Qiao Jing yesterday, they already understood that Lu Yenyi was a direct disciple of the Tao ancestor and the eldest disciple under the Grand Elder. She was also of the same generation as the God Emperor in the heavens. Putting aside the fate of their previous lives, their statuses were worlds apart. Lu Yenyi said warmly, "Junior sisters, please sit down and talk." The Wei sisters thanked her and sat down on the guest seat. Sun Shao excused himself and left the room. Lu Yenyi sat down and asked a lot of questions, most of which were about the Wei sisters' past in the state of Fu. As they talked, the 2 sisters gradually relaxed. However, it was different from when they were facing Sun Shao. Even with Wei Jiao's carefree personality, she didn't dare to speak carelessly in front of this eldest senior sister. Lu Yenyi saw that the 2 were uneasy. She recalled the past of the two sisters and revealed a trace of a smile. She said gently, "Senior sister will keep all the things that the two junior sisters used in the past. When the two junior sisters regain their memories, you can go and retrieve them." The two sisters didn't know why, but there was a surge of emotions in their hearts. Wei Wan stood up and bowed, saying, "Junior sister, thank you senior sister." At this moment, Wei Jiao's eyes were also slightly red. Lu Yenny sighed softly and raised her hand, saying, "Junior sister, please get up." After Wei Wan returned to her seat, she looked at the two sisters and said, "Qiao Jing has already told you about the matter of cultivation. You can stay here for now. Once you have opened your meridians, I will bring you to pay a visit to my teacher." Wei Wan bowed on her seat and said, "As you wish, senior sister." Lu Yenny gave a few more words of encouragement before letting them go. She then called Qiao Jing over and said, "The two junior sisters have returned just now and have many questions regarding cultivation. You have to help them. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me directly." Qiao Jing said, "Disciple understands." In the following days, the Wei sisters began to seriously cultivate. Because they'd experienced a life and death situation earlier, and they'd seen all the disciples of the White Sky Mountain estate cultivate diligently regardless of their cultivation. This had imperceptibly caused them to realize that as cultivators, only cultivation was the foundation. The Kunshur continent was originally rich in spiritium, and the White Mang Mountain was also a place where spiritium gathered. Moreover, there was no shortage of external objects for cultivation. After spending a year here, the two of them had successfully broken through and opened their meridians. At this point, they both knew that if there were no accidents, they should go to Xinyuan Heaven to pay a visit to their master, Xinyuan Tao ancestor. Chapter 1984. Half a month later, the Wei sisters' cultivation gradually stabilized. While continuing to cultivate, the two tried to learn some Taoist techniques. After all, the mountain spirit had left a deep impression on them, so they couldn't wait to learn some self-defense skills. After seeing them, Qiao Jing tactfully suggested that they didn't have to do so. The reason was that the two of them wouldn't have the opportunity to fight with others. If they really encountered an enemy, even the talismans on them would be much more useful. And when the memories of their previous bodies completely recovered, they would be able to remember everything they had learned in the past. At that time, if they still had the option to cultivate, it would be much easier with the experience left behind by their previous bodies. The Wei sisters still weren't very used to their current status. Putting aside their status as Qiao Jing's martial niece, they only knew that the latter's cultivation was far higher than theirs. So they attached great importance to this suggestion and immediately stopped. Seeing this, Qiao Jing put forward many useful suggestions one after another, appearing to be very attentive. She also had her own ideas. Right now, she was only an in-name disciple, but if she did a good job in taking care of the Wei sisters, then when they awakened the memories of their past lives, and if she could remember her good points, as long as she mentioned it in front of Lu Yenny, then she might be able to become an inner disciple. Another month passed. Just as the Wei sisters were gradually getting used to the life of cultivation, Qiao Jing received a message and said, "Martial uncles, Master has ordered me to find you too." The two followed Qiao Jing out of the residence. After a few turns, they arrived at the underwater mansion. Seeing Lu Yenny sitting there, they came up to greet her. Lu Yenny first asked about the progress of the two's cultivation and gave them a few pointers. Finally, she said, "My two junior sisters should know the reason why I called you here. This time, you have opened your meridians and broken through. You can be considered to have entered Tao. After you go down, make some small preparations. 3 days later, I will bring you to pay a visit to my master." The Wei sisters solemnly agreed and then took their leave. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The two sisters had already made preparations and set off at dawn. They followed Qiao Jing to the outside of the underwater mansion by using the teleportation formation. The two looked over and saw Lu Yenny in her fluttering white clothes standing on the shore of the lake. They hurriedly went up to greet her. Lu Yenny said, "My two junior sisters are here." They're going to the Xianyuan heaven to escape the world-breaking heaven. I've already summoned a fellow Taoist to receive them. Just wait here for a while. Xianyuan heaven was located high above the firmament, and there were still Yuan gang wreaking havoc in the gaps between the heavens. The Wei sisters' cultivation was shallow and could not withstand such invasion, so they had to borrow strength to cross. Naturally, with Lu Yenni's magical power, she could take them to Xianyuan heaven with just a shift. But because this was the first time the two sisters were going to visit their teacher after reincarnation, they had to be a little more solemn. Moreover, traversing the heavenly world itself was beneficial to cultivators like the two sisters who had just stepped onto the path of Tao. After waiting for a short while, a huge silhouette appeared in the sky. It seemed to occupy the entire sky, but it was impossible to see what it was. Soon, the silhouette gradually became real, and its body also gradually shrunk. In the end, a 10-foot-long jade Kuan appeared in the sky. It slowly landed on the lake and said in a clear young girl's voice, "Ying Shan greets Lu Shangzhen." Lu Yenni nodded in greeting. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Wei Jiao looked on curiously. This was the first time she had seen a creature that could speak. Although there were humanoid creatures in the state of Fu, most of them were slaves captured after battles. As for demons, the Ji clan and Divine Lord Ying Shi were in the state of Fu, and almost no one dared to approach them. Therefore, she had only heard of them in the past but had never seen them. As for the White Light Water Mansion, Lu Yenni did not accept any creatures, and all the maids were human. Ying Shan swayed her body and said, "Fellow Taoists, please come up. I'll take you to Xianyuan heaven." As she spoke, a spiritual light shone from her body and spread out in front of the group of people. The Wei sisters saw that Lu Yenni was the first to step up, so they followed behind her. Their minds swayed, and they found themselves in a spacious space. However, they could still see the outside world from here. Qiao Jing also came along this time. She said, "Martial uncles, we are inside the body of the Great Kuan, which is another world. We can sit, lie down, and walk here without any hindrance." She had benefited from the Wei sisters this time. Otherwise, as a third-generation disciple who was not a direct descendant, she would have to cultivate to the Grotto Heaven stage to go to Xianyuan heaven. At this time, the great Kuan Ying Shan swayed her head and tail, and with a rumble, she broke through the heaven pass and escaped to the outside world. Wei Jiao saw that the outside world was empty. The sun, moon, stars, land, mountains, and rivers were nowhere to be seen. She asked, "Taoist Qiao, where are we?" Qiao Jing replied, "Reporting to Uncle Master, the ancestral master and a few Yuan venerates arranged the heavens in order to prevent powerful foreign species from causing trouble in the outside world. This time, if we go to Xianyuan heaven according to the order, there will be a total of 36 heavens to pass through." Wei Wan asked, "Are these heavens the same as the Kuan-Shi continent?" Qiao Jing said, "The Kuan-Shi continent is a place of fortune. The other heavens are far inferior, but it is rumored that there are creatures living in each heaven." Wei Jiao stood on her tiptoes and looked around. "But I can't see anything." At this time, a spiritual light suddenly came over and landed in front of the three, floating there motionless. The three looked at it and saw that it was a small, exquisite mirror. Qiao Jing reached out and touched it. She handed it to the two and said, "This is a spiritual mirror given to me by my master. You can use it to observe the lower world." Wei Jiao held it in her hand. After looking at it for a while, she shone it at the outside world. In an instant, the mountains, rivers, geography, and even the scenery of this world appeared in the mirror. At this moment, she suddenly saw a young elk that had just been born not long ago. It was crying out, and her eyes couldn't help but light up. She couldn't help but want to see it more clearly. With a thought, not only did the little elk become visible, even its breath could be heard clearly. With another thought, she entered the depths of the ocean. There were strange creatures everywhere. Not only that, as she became more proficient in controlling it, she found that it could be as small as a speck of dust and as large as the sky and earth. These were things that the two of them couldn't see normally, but it greatly broadened their horizons. Although they had entered the Tao sect, their mentality had not changed. At this time, when they looked at the universe outside the world, they felt a sense of superiority, looking down on all things. Only at this moment did they truly feel that they were different from before. Cultivators should naturally transcend the mortal world, live eternally, and not be restrained by the heavens and the earth. When they thought up to here, their Tao hearts had unknowingly become slightly more perfect. At this time, Wei Jiao suddenly saw many cultivators traversing the land, hunting and killing demons everywhere. She asked, "Taoist Qiao, where is this? Why are there so many immortal disciples?" Qiao Jing took a look and said, "Reporting to Uncle Master, this is the chaotic heavens. After some demons in the Kunshur continent who liked to invade and disturb the human Tao were killed, their descendants were banished here. The various sects would often send their disciples here to train and collect some bones and skin to refine treasures and pills. Uncle Master has also been here before. The demons on the Kunshur continent were all extremely powerful. In the past, only the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven could move around freely, but even so, they had to be careful to avoid some fierce monsters. However, as the divine lords in the heavens and the cultivators of the heavens continued to purge them, there were no longer any ferocious demons around the nations of human Tao, at least. Some had been killed to extinction, and most of their descendants were sent here. With the help of the mirror, Wei Jiao looked at the fierce and ferocious appearances of the demons. They were very different from the pictures she had seen in the past. Her eyes widened. "So these are the fierce demons." Qiao Jing said, "When the two uncle masters reach a high level in their cultivation, they may also come here. This is a rare opportunity, why don't you take a look?" When Wei Jiao heard this, she also became serious. She no longer had the mood to play around, and carefully looked at the situation of this world. As they passed by one world after another, after an unknown period of time, the two sisters only felt a spiritual light around them. In a trance, they found that they were no longer in the body of the Yukuan, but standing on a row of clear clouds. At the same time, a voice sounded in their ears. "Xian Yuan Heaven has arrived. Yingshan will send you here." Lu Yinyi said, "Thank you, Taoist friend." She flicked her sleeves, and the clouds in front of her dispersed, revealing a magnificent Taoist palace. A row of jade steps appeared under her feet, leading straight to the palace platform in front. But in the clouds and mist, it was intermittent. She turned her eyes and looked at the Wei sisters. "Junior sisters, come with me." As she spoke, she took the lead and walked forward. At this time, Wei Jiao whispered, "What do you think Master looks like?" Wei Wan said, "Sister, don't talk about Master in private." Wei Jiao nodded and obediently stopped talking. She could also see that her sister was holding her sleeves tightly at this moment. It was clear that she was also very nervous, not much worse than herself. But in her heart, there was still a faint sense of expectation and urgency. After walking on the jade steps for a long time, the three of them came in front of the Taoist palace that was illuminated by the golden rainbow clouds. Looking up, they saw the words, "Qinghuan Palace," on the horizontal board. Jing Yu was already in front of the door to welcome them with a smile. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Lu Shangzhen." Then he bowed to the Wei sisters. "Greetings, Lady Wei. Master is in the palace. You can go and pay your respects." The Wei sisters couldn't help but look at Lu Yinyi. The latter nodded lightly and said, "Junior sisters, go in." The two sisters sorted out their fluctuating emotions and went into the Taoist palace. Soon, they came to a large hall and saw a black-robed Taoist sitting on a praying mat. Strange phenomena appeared around him, and Xian Qi shot up to the sky. The moment they saw this scene, the two sisters trembled and stood there in a daze. There seemed to be countless familiar and strange scenes floating in front of them, and at the same time, tears flowed down uncontrollably. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Disciple, wake up." As he said this, the two sisters seemed to wake up from a deep dream, and the scenes of the past appeared in their minds. Wei Jiao's eyes were filled with tears, and she choked and said, "Master, Master, Kating finally sees you again." As she spoke, she slowly bent down and bowed deeply. Wei Wan's eyes were also red. She slowly bowed and said, "Kai Wei greets Master." Zhang Yan sighed softly and stood up from the praying mat. He personally helped them up and said in a warm voice, "Thousands of years of friendship between master and disciple. Master is also very happy to see you two return to your seats today." Chapter 1985. The Wang sisters were much older than when Sun Shao had awakened his pre-memory. They had matured earlier, and now that they had entered the Tao, they viewed the world and all living things with a detached attitude. Therefore, in just an instant, they had returned to their original state. Wang Kading wiped her tears, crying and smiling at the same time. "Master, please forgive me for being rude. I'm just too happy to see Master." Zhang Yan smiled and said warmly, "It's fine. I'm happy too." Wang Kaiwei tried her best to maintain her appearance in front of her master, but her eyes were still red. "Kaiwei is useless. Not only can I not share Master's worries, but I also make Master worry about me." Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head. "You are my disciples. How can Master let go of my worries?" Wang Kaiwei bowed again. "I haven't congratulated Master for transcending the world and enjoying the Tao." Wang Kading also bowed. "Disciple congratulates Master." Zhang Yan nodded and accepted their bow. He returned to his seat and asked the two sisters about their life experiences. With his magic power, he only needed a thought to know the past and the future, but he did not use this on his disciples. Instead, he chose to ask them personally. The Wang sisters answered one by one seriously. In the process, more memories of their predecessors were picked up bit by bit and integrated with their original selves in this world. Although they were not very old, they had more than 1,000 years of experience in their previous lives. Therefore, they quickly became the most important part. The three of them talked for half a day in the palace before the Wang sisters left. But they were not in a hurry to leave. Zhang Yan had allowed them to stay in Xinyuan Heaven to cultivate for a period of time. If they had any questions in cultivation, they could come and ask him at any time. The Wang sisters knew that this was a rare opportunity and cherished it very much. Right now, although their cultivation levels were not high, their predecessors had reached the Yuanying stage. At that time, they were unable to advance any further. Naturally, they would search for a different path. Therefore, they had many questions in their hearts. Although they might not be able to use them in this life, at least they could broaden their horizons. When the two sisters walked out of the Holy Ji Palace, they saw Lu Yenyi and Sun Shao standing there, looking like they were waiting for them to come out. Feeling slightly touched, they went up and bowed, saying, "Greetings, eldest senior sister." "Greetings, junior brother Fu." Lu Yenyi said with a smile, "Congratulations on returning to your original state, junior sisters." Sun Shao raised his hand in greeting and said with a smile, "This little brother congratulates the two senior sisters." Wang Kading looked at him, pursed her lips into a smile, and said, "Junior martial brother, we'll have to trouble you this time. Otherwise, your senior martial sister Wei and I would have been eaten by that mountain. Senior martial sister owes you a favor." Looking at this familiar voice, Sun Shao was dazed for a moment, feeling like he had returned to the Dongxing continent. He said, "I remember when I was young in the Dongxing continent, I loved to eat the honey cakes made by senior martial sister the most. Although I have cultivated for a long time now, I can still recall the taste of that time." Wang Kading was startled and her voice softened. "If junior martial brother likes it, senior martial sister will personally make another for you." Sun Shao smiled. "All right, then junior martial brother will wait." With his cultivation level, he naturally did not need to eat those things anymore, and he had long lost his desire for good food in the mortal world. However, this was the friendship between senior martial sister and junior martial brother, and it could not be measured by simple food. Wang Kaiwei quietly watched the two of them talk. The corners of her lips curled up slightly. At this moment, the sky outside was clear and comfortable. Under the blue sky, the endless waves of clouds could not help but make one's state of mind infinitely distant, as if they had let go of everything. After standing for a long time, Wang Kaiwei recovered and asked Lu Yenyi, "Senior martial sister, how is second senior martial brother?" Lu Yenyi said, "He is still sitting in seclusion." Wang Kaiwei nodded lightly. They had been husband and wife with Tian Kuan in their previous lives, and they were also of the same sect, so she had asked. However, this was merely a matter of their previous life, and they would naturally not talk about it in this life. Among cultivators, the friendship between master and disciple was the highest. Between master and disciple, it was not that father and son surpassed father and son. Lu Yeni said, "The things that originally belonged to junior Marshall sisters are now all placed in the cave that was originally yours in Clear Darkness Water Manor. It is just that the restrictions will be changed every 12 years, and there are also spirit beasts guarding the manor outside. In a moment, I can order a disciple to accompany junior Marshall sisters to retrieve them." Wang Kaiwei curtsied, saying, "Thank you, senior Marshall sister." Lu Yeni said, "We are senior Marshall sisters, there is no need to say such things." Wang Kaiwei pondered for a moment, then said, "Senior Marshall sister, that disciple Qiao Jing treats people politely and is also capable. Why don't we let her go with us?" Lu Yeni nodded lightly, saying, "To be valued by junior Marshall sisters, this is her good fortune." She looked at Qiao Jing, saying, "From today onwards, you will follow at the side of the two sect uncles. Their orders are as master's orders." Qiao Jing curtsied, saying, "Disciple obeys." At this time, Lu Yeni stretched out her fair wrist, producing an intricate talisman which she handed to the Wang sisters, saying, "This was bestowed by master, and everyone in the sect has it. With it, you can go directly from the mountain and sea realm to the Kunshi continent. Junior Marshall sisters, please keep it well." Wang Kaiwei carefully received it, saying, "Many thanks, senior Marshall sister." The disciples of the Dao Palace chatted until the chimes of the bell rang out, and then said their goodbyes. Under Jing Yu's arrangements, the Wang sisters stayed in a side hall for the night. However, at this time, they still had several matters to attend to. If a cultivator were to reincarnate and step into the Dao again, then they would have to find a way to repay the karma of this life. For example, the kindness of one's parents was something that needed to be repaid the most, even serving them until the end of one's life. For example, when Tian Kuan had taken him as a disciple, he had brought his mother to the sect. However, the situation of the two sisters was different. Duke Wei and his wife had passed away when they were young, and they had been raised by their aunt. Even so, they hadn't seen each other very often, and their feelings for each other weren't very deep. That was because their aunt had simply used this as a pretext to take the wealth of their father, Duke Wei, so that she could squander it freely. Fortunately, she hadn't treated the two sisters harshly and had provided them with everything they needed. Of course, these things had originally belonged to the Wei clan. Now that the two sisters had stepped into the Dao, they naturally wouldn't think about getting these things back. In any case, their aunt had protected them, and it was impossible for two weak women to protect the family's wealth. Therefore, they had to accept this favor. After some discussion, they wrote down a deed and asked Qiao Jing to deliver it to the state of Fu. This could be considered an official gift of all the wealth to their aunt. In this way, they didn't owe each other anything. Under the arrangement of several Yuanzun, there were now realm gates in all the heavens, and there was also a teleportation formation altar on the land. Therefore, it didn't take long for Qiao Jing to come back to report. Things had been achieved as expected, but there were a few twists and turns along the way. When their aunt saw Qiao Jing, she quickly realized that the two sisters might have worshipped under some immortal family, so she didn't want to cut off this connection. Fortunately, Qiao Jing saw through her thoughts and tried to cut off her thoughts without leaving any loose ends. The Wang sisters successfully received this karma, and from then on, they had no more worries. This time, they stayed in Shenyuan heaven for a total of 3 years. Because of the recovery of their memories, all their past cultivation experience also came back, and their cultivation could be said to have advanced by leaps and bounds. On this day, after the two sisters had done their homework, Wang Kading said, "Sister, fortunately, we have built a solid foundation in this life. Coupled with superior cultivation techniques, we sisters will be able to take another step forward in the future." Wang Kaiwei also agreed with this view. In their previous lives, because of their insufficient aptitude, they couldn't practice the superior cultivation techniques, which became one of the reasons that hindered their progress. Another reason was that when they were cultivating, the spiritual opportunity of the 9 continents had already begun to decline, and there was a shortage of all kinds of external materials for cultivation. Only people with outstanding aptitude like Lu Yenyi, Wei Zihong, and Yuan Zhenqing could go further, or even be hindered on the road to Tao. But in this life, they were born in the Kunshe continent, a land with infinite spiritual opportunity, and had all kinds of external materials for cultivation. Coupled with what they had gained in their previous lives, they were very likely to enter the grotto heaven realm. However, if they wanted to go to a higher level, it would depend on their luck. Only by passing this level could they have the possibility to enjoy eternal life, otherwise there was still the possibility of reincarnation. Now, they were wholeheartedly focused on cutting off their mortal body. Even if their teacher was above them and they could open the memories of their previous lives, they didn't want to experience this again. Another month passed. The 2 sisters admitted that they had been staying here for too long and that they had disturbed their teacher too much. Many of their questions had been answered, and they could now go to the lower realm to cultivate. Having made their decision, they went to the palace to bid farewell to their teacher. Zhang Yan gave them a few gentle words of advice, and then let them go. To go to the Shenyuan heaven, one had to ride the Jade Kuan, but to go to the lower realm was not so troublesome. There was a grand teleportation formation in front of the palace, and with a thought, one could go to any realm. The Wang sisters and Xiao Jing used the formation to arrive in front of the clear Serenity underwater palace in the mountain and sea realm. The immortals' cave they had lived in was still preserved, and no one dared to occupy it. However, because it was convenient to travel between the heavens, most of the people living in the clear Serenity Lake were junior disciples with shallow cultivation bases. Those who had a bit of cultivation base had gone out to establish their own immortals' cave. The 2 sisters didn't like to stay with a group of juniors because it was inconvenient for them and others. So, after they retrieved their things, they borrowed the talisman Lu Yenyi gave them and returned to the Kunshe continent. Although they had recovered their memories, their cultivation bases had not yet recovered, so they could not go into the depths of the continent to establish their immortals' cave. They found a beautiful mountain range within the sphere of influence of the human Tao, and used the cloud dragon soul essence that Zhang Yan had given them to move water and soil, and cut into the mountain walls. Before long, they had built an exquisite temple at the peak of the mountain, which they now used to cultivate. When Sun Shao heard about this, he brought a few of his disciples to pay a visit. They stayed there for more than a month, during which time they set up many restrictive spell formations for the 2 sisters, and also transplanted quite a few exotic flowers and spirit trees from his own immortals' cave. One day, as the 3 of them were talking about the Tao, they heard the roar of a dragon coming from the sky. At the same time, the sky suddenly darkened. Sun Shao stood up and said, "Senior sisters, it must be senior brother Wei and junior brother Yuan." Chapter 1986. When the Wang sisters saw that they were from the same sect, they came out of the temple with Sun Shao to welcome them. When he reached the outer room, he saw ink clouds rolling over. Inside the clouds, a magnificent dragon carriage appeared. There were 16 ink dragons pulling the carriage at the front, and behind it, there were more than 10 cloud rafts with more than 1,000 attendants standing on them. After a while, the dragon carriage slowly landed in front of the mountain. Wei Zihong and Yuan Zhenqing got off the carriage together and walked over. When they reached the temple gate, Wei Zihong came up and bowed solemnly, saying, "Greetings to the 2 senior sisters." Yuan Zhenqing also bowed. The Wang sisters returned the greeting, saying, "Junior brother Wei greets, junior brother Yuan greets." After they greeted each other, Wang Kaiwei said, "The 2 junior brothers are guests from afar, please take a seat inside." Wei Zihong and Yuan Zhenqing followed the Wang sisters into the main hall and sat down. After a while, maids came over to serve tea. Wei Zihong looked around and said with a smile, "The 2 senior sisters are setting up a new cave abode. I'm afraid there are few obedient people in the sect." This time, junior brother brought over 1,000 attendants to make it convenient for senior sisters to order around. His Yaoyin gate had many demon cultivators, but he knew that the Wang sisters rarely used demons, So the attendants they brought this time were all human. They were all from the same sect, and they were just attendants, so there was no need to be polite. Wang Kaiwei nodded and said, "Then many thanks, junior brother." Wang Kaiwei instructed, and Xiao Jing walked out. Not long later, she brought in the many attendants and quickly settled them down. Although the Wang sisters had brought over a dozen attendants from White Glow Mountain Estate, for the sake of convenience in the future, this temple was built very big from the start. A mere dozen people obviously couldn't take care of all of them, so many areas were empty. Now that there were over 1,000 people, it added a lot of liveliness. Wei Zihong said with a smile, "Just now, that martial niece seems to be eldest senior sister's disciple?" Wang Kaiwei said, "Before we sisters regained our memories, this martial niece Qiao took care of us a lot. Her temperament was also not bad. Since our disciples were no longer around and there was no one nearby, we asked senior sister for her." The two sisters had taken in quite a few disciples in the past, but even the ones with the highest achievements stopped at Yuaning. Now, they were also in the process of reincarnation. Their own cultivation hadn't recovered, but they still couldn't find them. As for the disciples of the next 3 generations, they were separated by a layer, so they wouldn't bother with them anymore. At this moment, Yuan Jianqing took out a jade box and placed it on the table. He said, "This is a top-notch treasure that I collected when I was roaming the Kunshe continent. There are also some gifts from the sect over the years. I don't have any use for it now, so I believe that senior sister will have a use for it." Wang Kading gladly accepted it and said, "Thank you, Shidi." Among the sachets they retrieved, there were a lot of magic weapons that they had used in the past, but most of them were used after they had transformed their cores. Most of the magic weapons that they had used before were given to their disciples. Apart from those top-notch treasures, these gifts from the sect were just enough to make up for what they lacked. Although they wouldn't encounter any danger in the human Dao domain, and these treasures were insignificant in the face of the great restrictive formations, they couldn't just omit them. After all, you never knew what would happen in the next moment on the path of cultivation. Even a little extra help was good. Of course, if they really needed it, it wouldn't be hard for them to come by. However, gifts from the same sect couldn't be measured in this way. Moreover, the top-notch treasures had been personally gathered by Yuan Jianqing, so the significance here was naturally different. After a few words of greeting, the fellow disciples talked about what had happened after they parted, and when they talked about their memories, they couldn't help but sigh. Wei Zihong sighed. "Back in the heavenly lake of bright nether, the 9 of us cultivated together under Master's tutelage. It was such a carefree and happy life. Unfortunately, it's no longer the same as before." Yuan Jianqing said, "As long as our fellow disciples have the heart to pursue the Tao and ask for justice, then even if we're far away from each other, it'll still be right in front of us." Wang Kaiwei nodded lightly. "Junior brother Yuan is right. If we can all climb to the next realm, I'm sure Master will be very happy." Sen Shao said, "Now that 2nd senior brother and 5th senior brother are both in closed-door cultivation, I only hope that they can successfully pass through it." Wei Zihong couldn't help but think of Han Zwicheng at this time. He sighed. "Junior brother Han is still reincarnating, and I don't know when he'll return." Among his fellow disciples, he had a good relationship with Han Zwicheng. Han Zwicheng's aptitude was decent, but due to various reasons he had no desire to improve, which was why he was delaying his cultivation. He was very different from the Wang sisters, who had no hope after their hard work. Yuan Jianqing said, "Senior brother Han's juniors aren't bad. One of them has already cultivated to the Grotto Heaven realm, and another grandson has done great things under Master's tutelage. He's quite a talent." As they were talking, they heard a whistling sound from outside. It was obviously someone from Xianmen who had teleported here, but his cultivation level wasn't high. Wang Kaiwei said with concern, "Martial niece Qiao, please go out and see which fellow Taoist has arrived." Qiao Jing accepted the order and went out. When she reached the door, she saw a handsome young cultivator standing there. His aura was quite upright, and she could tell at a glance that he was from Xianmen. She bowed and asked, "Fellow Taoist, where are you from?" The young cultivator returned the greeting seriously and said, I'm Lichong, a disciple of Spirit Returning Sect. Master heard that the two uncle masters have returned to the sect, so he should have come to congratulate you. However, Master is currently in closed-door cultivation, so he can't come personally. Therefore, he ordered this disciple to deliver a congratulatory gift. Qiao Jing knew about Spirit Returning Sect. Although it wasn't a Xianmen sect in Donghua continent, it was still one of the sects in the 9 continents. Especially the current sect master, who was rumored to have cultivated under the ancestral master since he was young, so he could almost be regarded as a family member. She said, "Then please wait here, I'll go and report to the 2 uncle masters." Lichong cupped his hands and said, "Thank you." Qiao Jing immediately returned to the palace to report. When Wang Kaiwei heard this, she said, "So it's junior apprentice brother Shen who came to congratulate us. Call that martial nephew in." Lichong was summoned to the hall after a short while. After he entered, he looked at the seat and was shocked. Since he was sent here by Shen Tong, his eyesight was not bad. He recognized Wei Zihong and Yuan Zhengqing at a glance. These two were upper Jinren who had severed their mortal bodies. He thought that it would be difficult to see even one of them, so he didn't expect to see 2 of them here. Although the rest of them had not recovered their cultivation, they were still the direct disciples of the Taoist ancestor. In the future, they would all be able to reach the upper Jinren realm. Thinking about this, his heart was filled with respect. He bowed and said, "Disciple Lichong greets the uncle masters and uncle masters." Wang Kaiwei said that he was excused and asked about Shen Tong's recent situation. Lichong answered all of them, then he took out a brocade box and said, "This is a congratulatory gift that Master asked me to bring." Wang Kaiwei nodded and ordered people to accept it. She said, "When we go back, thank junior martial brother Shen for me." Lichong said yes. Wang Kaiwei asked a few more questions and asked Qiao Jing to invite him away. When Qiao Jing returned, she asked, "Uncle Master, the servants are ready. Can we start the banquet?" Wang Kaiwei said, "All right, go ahead." Not long after plate of rare and exotic fruits were placed on the table. All of these were unique to the Kunshe continent, and they were planted by Lu Yenyi in the White Radiance Mountain Manor. When she saw that the Wang sisters had set up another abode, she gifted them quite a bit. These things were even beneficial to cultivators who had severed their mortal bodies. The banquet was nearing night, and the sun was setting in the west. At this moment, there were guests who came to visit. They said that they were from Qinsong School. Wang Kaiwei said, "Since you are from the same sect, please come in." After a while, a middle-aged Taoist with an extraordinary appearance came into the hall. He bowed to the people sitting at the table and said, "I am Ranguoji, the guardian sent by the sect to Zhaoyuan. Greetings to the 2 reverends, greetings to the rest of the sect." Wang Kaiwei stood up and returned the greeting. She said politely, "Jinren Ran, greetings. Do you have anything to say?" Ranguoji said, "The purple light courtyard of the sect heard that the 2 of you have reincarnated into Taoism. They are very happy. They specially ordered me to deliver your genealogical records, robes, and accessories to congratulate the 2 of you on your return to the sect." Zhang Yan's identity as Hall Master Dujin of Qinsong School was still there. So after the Wang sisters reincarnated, they were still disciples of Qinsong School. Normally, if a disciple of a big sect like Qinsong School reincarnated, they would definitely seek out the purple light courtyard and accept their genealogical records from their previous life to correct their reputation in this world. It should be known that with the identity of a disciple of Qinsong School, they could enjoy a lot of benefits. Moreover, they could travel freely in the heavens. However, the Wang sisters were different. As the direct disciples of the Taoist ancestor, they did not care much about these things. On the contrary, it was the purple light courtyard that wanted them to correct their reputation as soon as possible. Wang Kaiwei took the genealogical records and flipped through them. Seeing that there were handwriting from her previous life on it, she could not help but recall the scene of that time. She raised her hand and gently stroked it. She sighed softly and raised her head. "Jinren Ran, you personally sent this. We must be polite. Please have a seat." Ranguoji declined. He could tell that it was a banquet for fellow disciples of Xinyuan School. As an outsider, he did not want to be hated. After delivering the genealogical records, he had completed the task entrusted to him by the sect. There was no need for him to stay any longer. He immediately bid farewell and left. However, in the following days, the Wang sisters did not expect that many people who only had a little friendship with their previous lives would come to visit. Even if it was inconvenient for them to come, they would ask their disciples to send gifts. It seemed that they wanted to deepen their relationship with the two sisters while their cultivation was still shallow. For a while, there was an endless stream of people who came to visit. Even so, the Wang sisters did not feel that their cultivation was disturbed because most of the people were stopped by Qiao Jing. The two sisters felt that Qiao Jing was very capable. Furthermore, she was not a maid but a martial niece, so they had to treat her generously. After some discussion, the two of them summoned Qiao Jing and handed her a letter. Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "Martial nephew Qiao, this is the letter from senior sister. Take it and read it." Qiao Jing took the letter and read it. She was immediately filled with endless joy. This was personally written by Lu Yenni. It said that as long as she worked hard under the Wang sisters, when she saw this letter, she would become an official disciple of Xianyuan school. She was so excited that she could not control herself. In Qinsong school, all disciples in name were not listed in the genealogical records, so they could not be considered part of the Xianyuan school. But now that she had become an official disciple, she could go out and call herself a disciple of Xianyuan school. This meant that even if she reincarnated in the future, she could still receive guidance from her master. She had seen how the Wang sisters looked when they reincarnated. She took a deep breath and bowed deeply. She said sincerely, "Thank you, martial uncles. If I am successful in my cultivation in the future, I will not forget the kindness you have shown me today." Chapter 1987. In Qinghuan Palace, Zhang Yan's consciousness was immersed in Busha heaven, and many truths of the great Tao were reflected over. In the past, he found that when he had a clone in this world, it was easier for him to comprehend the mysteries when he tried to comprehend it himself. This was probably because this world was connected to Busha heaven. Perhaps there was a deeper reason behind this, but he couldn't see it yet. While he was meditating, he suddenly felt something in his heart. After calculating, he knew what was going on and said, "So there's such a change. I have to guard against it." He immediately called Jing Yu in and said, "Take my message and invite the 4 fellow Taoists here." Jing Yu said, "I'll go now." Not long after, Dan Yi, Michihito Ichito, Fu Qingming, and Taoist 1K all received Zhang Yan's message. If it was any other time, even if something happened, they only needed to send a message. But since it was so serious now, there must be something important. After the 4 determined this, the moment they received the message, they immediately put down what they were doing and came to Qinghuan Palace. In a flash, the 4 crossed the world sky and landed in front of Qinghuan Palace. They were then invited into the main hall. After greeting the 4, Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and said, "Please sit down and talk, fellow Taoists." The 4 of them expressed their gratitude and sat down. Danny asked, "Why did Qinghuan Palace Lord invite us here?" Zhang Yan said, "The specific reason is related to an almighty being outside this world, so it's hard to say. I can only tell fellow Taoists that I just now have a feeling that because of this almighty being, there may be living beings in this world who will be reflected by his consciousness and then be used by him. At that time, it's very likely that he will use this to invade the place where we are, so we have to find a way to conceal this matter." The feeling he just now had was caused by the existence that was rumored to invade and destroy everything. It wasn't that this person had truly arrived, it was just a premonition. Originally, with his magic power in the modern realm, unless this person could kill his way to him and defeat him, it would be impossible for him to invade. However, his cultivation had already reached an extremely profound level. This time, he was able to bypass his power and directly infect the living beings in the real world. Once these living beings were bewitched and worshipped that person, they could possibly draw that person's consciousness over. If it weren't for the fact that his consciousness was immersed in the present world, he might not have been able to sense it. Of course, The other spirit refinement cultivators might not care about this, because the world behind them was already dispensable to them. It didn't matter even if they died. However, it was different for him. Not only did he have disciples, but he also had Bu Shutian. Because of Bu Shutian, he might even receive more attention. Before he could completely control Bu Su Tian, if he was targeted by that existence, it would be extremely difficult to resist, so he had to avoid it as much as possible. In fact, with his cultivation, he could make all living beings no longer be manipulated by external forces with a single thought. However, the problem was that the existence's cultivation was higher than his. Spirit refinement was originally a battle of chi activity and magic power. The more he tried to repel this one, the more likely it was to attract him over. Therefore, he could not just leave it to the people below him to do it. The expressions of the four became extremely serious. Even a spirit refinement cultivator like Zhang Yan had to be on guard in advance. It was clear that this matter was not small. Taoist 1K pondered and asked, "I have a question here. If Palace Lord Qinghuan does not become a Grand Supreme, will this happen?" Fu Qingming frowned and said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm afraid you're wrong to say that. Although I haven't reached the supreme state, I know that if an existence of such a level were to act, how could it not be measured by the principles of karma?" Taoist 1K cupped his hands and said sincerely, "How would I dare to think so? It's just that I am confused about this matter, so I came to ask Palace Lord Qinghuan." He did not blame Zhang Yan for bringing this matter. After all, without Zhang Yan, he would not have been able to reform his Dharma body. However, he really had doubts about this matter and could not help but want to find out the truth. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "What Taoist 1K said, if used in the ordinary present world, is not without reason. However, because of Bu Shutian's existence in the world we are in, it is different. If the existence that invaded everyone manifested, the first people it would deal with would be the spirit refinement cultivators of the same generation. Therefore, spirit refinement cultivators would be the most sensitive to it. And because of his existence in this world, it would definitely attract it. If that was all, then what Taoist 1K said about karma was right. It was indeed because of him that this happened. However, if this was the ordinary present world, then he actually did not have to think about this. Because regardless of whether he paid attention to it or not, the present world would naturally die. Whether that existence did it intentionally or not, no matter how many waves it stirred in the world, it was meaningless to him. However, in this present world, because it was connected to Bu Shutian, the situation was a little special. As long as Bu Shutian was still around, this world would not die, and this gave rise to more possibilities. Moreover, Bu Su was the essence of creation. Even if he wasn't here, he would still be able to attract this person. From this point of view, with him overseeing this place, he would be able to protect this world. The four listened to his explanation and nodded. Although they did not understand the reason for the change in the outer world, it was clear that because of Bu Shutian's existence, the world in this present world was different. Dan Yi bowed and said, "We cannot understand the battle of the upper realm. What should we do? Palace Lord Qinghuan, please tell us what to do." Zhang Yan said, "When this person's consciousness will reflect will not be able to be calculated, but we can restrict the source and not let the unknown thing happen. Everything in the world needs to be careful." Danny thought about it and said, "On the Kunshe continent, this matter can be handed over to Zhaoheng. As the Divine Master, he is in charge of obscenity and evil sacrifices. Also, the sects in the heavens should strictly order that those who are not from the heavens and earth, those who are not from the sect, those who are not from the elders, and those who are not from the ancestors cannot be sacrificed." Fu Qingming pondered and said, "Zhaoheng should be able to control the human path, but Palace Lord Qinghuan's words involve all living beings in the world, including demons, monsters, and even the beasts of the void. This person is extremely difficult to control." Taoist 1K said lightly, "If you all agree, then we can just wipe them all out." Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "There is no need to do that. Killing all living beings other than the human race is a bad plan. Although we can change the rules of the heavens, This is undoubtedly a mess and not in line with the principles of creation. Among all living beings, humans have the most spiritual nature and are the most likely to enter Tao. If that consciousness comes over, it will first attach itself to this, followed by the cultivators of the other races. As for those who can't even cultivate a human body, we can ignore them. Everyone nodded. In this way, the scope was much smaller. Although they could see through the heavens and realms with a sweep of their thoughts, who could say that they could definitely see through matters involving the cultivators of the upper realm? It was best to eliminate it at the source as much as possible. Michito Ichido said, "In the myriad realms, there are many treasures and spirits that are worshipped, and there are still some wandering outside. However, they did not hinder me previously, so I let them go and did not control them. Now, I will go and collect them and stop them from worshipping." Taoist 1K said, "I don't have any sect disciples, so I will naturally travel to the various realms and monitor this matter to get rid of the root cause." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Then I will leave this matter to you, fellow Taoists." After the matter was settled, Dan Yi and the others bid farewell and left one after another, but only Taoist 1K stayed behind. Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, do you have something to say?" Taoist 1K said, "I thought about what Palace Lord Qinghuan said and thought of a way. I wonder if it is feasible." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If you have an idea, why don't you say it?" Taoist 1K said, "I remember that after Palace Lord Qinghuan succeeded, he used his Tao voice to announce to the various realms. I think that Palace Lord Qinghuan might as well preach the Tao every once in a while to correct his mind. After that, even if external evils come in, it will be difficult for them to do anything." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. It should be said that this suggestion made some sense. That was because the spirit refinement was both implicated and opposed. If living beings heard of his great Tao for a long time, they would naturally be able to block the other Grand Supreme's attention. The profoundness of this was not something that people like Taoist 1K, who had once glimpsed the upper realm, could think of. However, this was still not appropriate. This was actually changing the person that the living beings worship to. It was not a problem, but from a broader point of view, this matter was actually a contest between him and that existence. If that existence secretly changed the person that it worshipped and quietly planted his consciousness in, then it would be self-defeating. He said, "I will consider fellow Taoist's words." Taoist 1K stood up, bowed and left. Several days later, in the depths of the earth abyss in the mountain and sea realm, Yuan Hongyang was nourishing his magical treasure in the alchemy room when a disciple's voice came from outside. "Master, just now, a messenger from Xian Yuantian heaven has delivered a letter, saying that it must be presented to Master." Yuan Hongyang waved his sleeve and opened the door of the alchemy room. "Let me see it." The disciple held a letter in his hand and respectfully presented it to Yuan Hongyang. He bowed again and left. Yuan Hongyang opened the letter and read it. There was no change in his expression. He thought for a long time, and his spirit entered an indescribable state. A moment later, Xue Dingyuan also arrived. He bowed and said, "Greetings, sect leader Yuan." Yuan Hongyang said, "Greetings, sect leader Xue. I believe sect leader Xue has also received the letter from Xian Yuantian heaven?" Xue Dingyuan said, "I have. This is not a small matter, and Palace Master Qinghuan is personally taking care of it. This matter is urgent." Yuan Hongyang said, "Sect leader Xue, do you have any ideas?" Xue Dingyuan smiled and said, "Speaking of which, there is one person who is very suitable to handle this matter. Sect leader Yuan, you might as well ask this person to take action. It will save us a lot of trouble." Yuan Hongyang thought for a moment and said, "Elder Sima?" Then he nodded and said, "Elder Sima is indeed suitable. I will ask him to take charge of this matter in a while." The heavenly demon was not a living creature, and it was very convenient to use it for monitoring matters. As long as Sima Quan was willing, the countless demons would be enough to keep an eye on all the disciples of the spiritual gate. If there was any unusual movement, it would be discovered immediately. As for the celestial gate, it was unlikely that they would use the spiritual gate, so there was no need for him to say anything more. Chapter 1988. A month later, the various sects of the 9 continents received the Grand Supreme's edict, which clearly stated that they were to find a way to ban all obscene sacrifices and evil sacrifices. Apart from the sect leaders who had some understanding of the situation, the others had no idea why, and began to ask around. Although there were many rumors, very few were actually trustworthy. In any case, this was a Dharmic edict from the Grand Supreme Taoist Patriarch. Furthermore, it was signed by the 4 current Yuan Zun, which showed that this was no small matter. Therefore, no one dared to be negligent, and they ordered their disciples to investigate. Anyone who did such a thing in their own territory would be banned. In the Yuan heavens, exterminating obscene sacrifices and evil sacrifices could be directly rewarded with karma points. Therefore, the cultivators of the Yuan heavens worked very hard. In fact, there were many cultivators who, in order to earn more karma points, secretly disseminated the method of sacrifice, which they would then exterminate themselves. Fortunately, such a thing was not recognized by the karma point system, so they gave up after trying to no avail. There were many heavens in the modern world, and wherever there was spiritual opportunity, there were Taoist cultivators. Doing such a thing was relatively easy, but there was one place that was very troublesome, and that was the Busha heavens. The Busha heavens were vast and boundless, and contained countless realms of various sizes. There were some that the Taoist cultivators had never been to before, and so they could only rely on almighty experts to calculate and deal with the strange movements. Mountain and Sea Realm, Jade Moon Sect's main altar. Wei Zihong had also received a message. As a disciple of Zhang Yan, and someone who had severed his mortal body, he was qualified to know the whole story. Because he knew how serious the matter was, he paid close attention. Such things were not uncommon in the Yaoyin clan. Because some of his disciples were outsiders, they all had their own customs. In addition to offering sacrifices to their ancestors, there were also people who offered sacrifices to Bo Bai and Bo Xian. Offering sacrifices to the ancestors was not a taboo, and Bo Bai and Bo Xian were mountain and sea gods of the sun and moon. It wasn't as if they had no foundation, so offering sacrifices to them wouldn't hurt. However, the mountain and sea realm was rumored to have many strange gods and ghosts, so there would be no shortage of people to offer sacrifices to. In the past, he didn't care about these things. As long as the disciples followed the rules of the sect, it would be fine. But now it was different. His master had personally issued an edict. He couldn't let this place become a forbidden place. After some consideration, he called over a disciple close to him and said, "I remember that many disciples in the sect have the custom of worshipping and offering sacrifices." The disciple said in disdain, "Master, this person was born ignorant. He didn't know how to worship the masters of heaven and earth. Instead, he worshipped those demons and devils. He's not sincere to the Tao, and he's not sincere to himself. He's not a cultivator at all." Wei Zihong said, "Today, your martial ancestor has issued an edict to forbid all obscene worship and evil sacrifices. From now on, this kind of conduct cannot be allowed to continue in our sect. I will leave it to you to handle this matter. I don't care what happens in other places, but my Yaoyin sect will not allow this kind of thing to happen again." When the disciple heard that the martial ancestor had issued an edict, a look of reverence appeared on his face. He loudly replied, "Don't worry, Master. Disciple will handle this matter properly. I won't let Master down." He bowed and was about to leave when Wei Zihong called out, "Just now, your 2 sect uncles have returned to the sect. Their Tao cultivation hasn't been restored, and they don't have enough subordinates. Send a few capable people to Jade Plume Peak." The disciple said, "Disciple will make the arrangements after I return." The disciple worked quickly. 2 or 3 days later, he came back to report that everything in the territory under the control of the Yaoyin clan headquarters had been properly arranged. From now on, the disciples would supervise each other. If it was an official sacrifice, they would have to report it to the sect first. If it was a private sacrifice, once it was verified, their cultivation would be crippled and they would be expelled from the sect. Wei Zihong had also expected this. These territories were under the eyes of the sect leader. If there was any situation, he could immediately respond. No one dared to go against him. Therefore, it was very normal for things to go smoothly. Moreover, as long as a cultivator maintained their Tao heart, they would only have the path of Tao in their eyes. Very few people would go to worship for power. What he was worried about was the location of those subaltars. Now that the Yao Yin clan had subaltars of small sects in the land of Kunsher continent and even in the other worlds, he had directly handed these places to the disciples to manage. His control was inevitably weaker, and it was the easiest for problems to occur. As expected, as the news of the subalters came one after another, the situation was indeed not as smooth as the headquarters. Moreover, most of it was on those mountain ghosts. Back then, after the sects of the 9 continents attacked the Western Absolute Domain, the majority of the mountain ghost tribes surrendered. Because there were many of them and they were born with supernatural powers, cultivators liked to bring them along when they went on an expedition to the other worlds. On one hand, it was to reduce the number of mountain ghosts, and on the other hand, it was used to eliminate the local monsters and monsters. And after the subaltars were established, they could also be used as coolies. However, this brought about a result, and that was that there were people of this generation in almost every world. And the news that came from below was that after the prohibition of obscene worship and evil sacrifice, the mountain ghosts of 3 subaltars all betrayed the sect. Wei Zihong was surprised. If the mountain ghosts only worshipped Guizhou, it was considered worshipping their ancestors, and there was no need to go to the point of betraying the sect. Now that 3 subalters had done such a thing at the same time, the implications behind it were definitely not that simple. He immediately called the disciple over to ask in detail. The disciple replied, "Previously, those mountain ghosts did indeed worship Guizhou, but as our generation conquered the various worlds, their horizons gradually broadened, and they knew that Guizhou was indeed dead. Therefore, they secretly worshipped another. When I went to investigate thoroughly, I only found out about this matter. This generation worshipped a strange creature called Hengzhuan. It is said that as long as one worships it sincerely, they will obtain an inexplicable supernatural power." Wei Zihong's expression became serious. If this generation could worship an unknown thing today, then it was possible that they would also worship that existence in the future. And to betray the sect for the object of worship, it meant that in this generation's heart, the person who bestowed the supernatural power was more important than the sect. He tried to calculate and found that he could not infer what Hengzhuan was, which meant that this person's level was at least at the same level as his. He thought about it. Although there was spiritual opportunity in the places where the subaltars were located, it was not enough to support a big demon, so this person could only be an outsider. After making this judgment, he used a spell to calculate and immediately confirmed its origin. This was a void creature. He thought for a moment and said solemnly, "Immediately send someone to capture the defected disciple. From now on, no one in my Yao Yin world is allowed to worship Guizhou." The disciple said excitedly, "Yes." There were both foreign species of monster cultivators and human cultivators in the Yao Yin clan, but the relationship between the two sides was not very harmonious. They were both trying to compete for the sect's resources and the way to improve. Once this order was passed down, he believed that it would definitely cause a lot of backlash, but so what? It was rare to find an opportunity to suppress the foreign species cultivators, so he would definitely find a way to seize it. After Wei Zihong ordered the disciple to leave, he thought that although these things happened in his territory, there might not be only these believers of Hengzhuan. There might be more hidden in the other subalters that had yet to show up. However, it was easy to solve this problem. As long as this void creature was killed, then the source would be cut off, and the remaining evil would not be able to cause any trouble. However, there was a problem here. In the void, there was no distance, no past, and no future, so there was no way to fight. If this void creature did not invade a certain space, it would be difficult to do anything to them. He thought for a moment. If it was someone else, it might be difficult, but he was the direct disciple of the Taishang Taoist ancestor, so it was not difficult to solve this problem. He immediately got up and went to the back hall, bowed to the memorial tablet on the table. Not long after, he felt a flash of spiritual light in front of him. He looked up and saw a talisman appear on the altar. He bowed and said, "Thank you, Master, for the technique." He walked forward and kept the decree. Then he turned to the main hall and gathered all the elders and capable disciples. After that he said, "I'm going to the outer space. I'll temporarily leave the matters of the sect to all of you." All the elders and disciples respectfully accepted the order. After Wei Zihong gave his orders, he turned into a ray of spiritual light and rushed out of the outer space. In an instant he appeared in the void. His divine will turned, and he followed the source of the calculation. It seemed like a long time had passed, but it also seemed like a moment had passed. A void spirit appeared in front of him. It looked like a crystal snake made of countless stars, but it had a face that was hard to tell if it was a man or a woman. It had facial features, eyebrows, and hair. Seeing that Wei Zihong was coming, the monster was not afraid at all. Instead, it had a mocking look in its eyes. It obviously thought that even if Wei Zihong found it, he could not do anything to it. Seeing this, Wei Zihong couldn't help but laugh. He said, "It's just a void creature. How can it know the power of spells?" He waved his sleeve and threw out the talisman. Once the talisman appeared, it turned into a world. The void creature couldn't help but go inside. Wei Zihong flicked his sleeves behind him and disappeared into it. The void creature was struggling left and right but couldn't break out of the world. It was obvious that it was sealed here. It immediately revealed a look of fear. After Wei Zihong came in, the eye between his eyebrows suddenly opened. A ray of spiritual light shot out and enveloped the void creature. Without the protection of the void creature's strength was negligible. In just 3 or 4 breaths, the void creature completely disappeared. Wei Zihong closed his eyes and divined for a while. He frowned. He found that the problem was not solved. The mountain ghosts that obtained the spells could still use such abilities. This meant that the monster was not the real source. There must be a powerful being above it. He immediately felt that this was troublesome. He didn't even notice this person when he calculated before. This meant that this person's cultivation and abilities were far superior to his. This wasn't something he could deal with. He immediately took out a jade scroll and chanted a few words in his heart. He then sent it out and let it turn into a ray of light and fly away. At this moment, Zhang Yan was cultivating in Qinghuan Palace when he suddenly sensed something. He stretched out his hand and took out a jade slip. With just a thought, he understood the cause and effect of the matter. After a brief calculation, he discovered that the source of the matter was actually the depths of Bu Shutian. There were still many secrets hidden in Bu Su Tian. Even he didn't know all of them, so it was not strange for this to happen. However, he didn't think this was a bad thing. Instead, he thought it was a good thing. Because the more mysteries of this place were revealed, the closer he was to the real key. If he wanted to control Bu Su Tian, there would be more and more incidents like this in the future. Chapter 1989. Zhang Yan pondered. No matter what happened in the future, since there was a clear clue in front of him, he had to find a way to get rid of this variable. However, Baksu Heaven could be said to have countless worlds. Even if he could identify the general direction, he could not accurately deduce its true location in a short time unless he repeatedly calculated and investigated to the end. However, the more he investigated, the more likely it was that more things would come out. Some might have nothing to do with it, and might even float to the surface because of this. He was not afraid of these troubles, but he also needed to control this place. He could not let too many things come out at once. Right now, the most appropriate method was to send disciples of the sect to the heaven realm that might worship this existence. Then, they would be able to find the location of this existence. And because the cultivation of the lower generation disciples was not high, as long as they did not do unrelated things, they would not be able to touch things of a higher level. Thinking about this, he waved his sleeve, and a spiritual light landed on Kunshe continent. In the White Glow Mountain estate, Lu Yeni was currently looking at the report that was reported. Ever since she received Zhang Yan's personal edict, she did not hesitate to clean up Bright Serenity Lake and White Glow Mountain estate. Fortunately, The disciples of Shenyuan did not need to worship any gods or monsters. If they had to worship, they would worship their patriarch. After all, the patriarch was much more powerful than those strange things, so this matter was unusually smooth. She finished reading the report and put it to the side. After meditating for a while, a spiritual light appeared in the pool, slowly condensing into the shape of a palm leaf. "It's a letter from my master." Her heart moved and she reached out to take it. A spiritual light flashed in her eyes, and all the contents were reflected in her mind. After pondering for a moment, the tip of her finger brushed the pool, and the splashing water fell. Like a zither being plucked, it gave off a clear tinkling sound that spread far away. Not long later, the 7 disciples cultivating in the underwater estate all came to the seat and bowed. They said, "Greetings, Manor Head." Lu Yeni said, "Now, there is an almighty hiding in the depths of Buxa Heaven. His plot may not be beneficial to me, so my master has sent down a decree, ordering me to send disciples to the various unknown worlds, and try to find clues about this person." A disciple asked, "How many disciples does Manor Head need? Is there a limit to their cultivation?" Lu Yeni said, "We only need junior disciples, the more the better." The disciple and the people beside him looked at each other, and their expressions relaxed. Originally, they had assumed that they would have to send their own disciples to handle such a matter. After all, the path ahead was difficult, and if any mishaps occurred, they would feel heartache. However, if they were just ordinary disciples, it would be much easier. There was no need to even mention the mountains and valleys of the mountains and rivers. The bright nether heavenly lake now had so many disciples. In the past, Taoist cultivators had been limited by high-grade techniques and other items. But now, the mountain and sea realm was rich in resources, and the Shenyuan sect had no shortage of techniques. Without those restrictions, they could easily send out tens of thousands of disciples. After the 7 of them retreated, they each went their own way. A day later, the bells of the clear serenity heavenly lake in the mountain and sea realm began to toll. When the disciples in the mansion heard the sound, they hurried over to the Dharma altar. There was a large open space in front of the Dharma altar, which could normally accommodate tens of thousands of people listening to Taoist teachings. There were also more than 1,000 stone platforms, on which only those with profound cultivation or seniority could sit. At that moment, a Taoist dressed in a white Taoist robe walked into the center of the square. He sat down on one of the stone platforms in front of him, then took out a flagon of wine from his sleeve. From time to time, he would tilt his head back and drink from it. His name was Yushin Lu, and he was a featherman. He was originally a disciple taken in by Jingyu. 300 years ago, when Jingyu felt that his lifespan was coming to an end, he took him in as a disciple, preparing to replace him as Zhang Yan's attendant after he was reincarnated. Later, he was granted eternal life by Zhang Yan, so he didn't have to do that anymore. However, he didn't mistreat Yushinlu. He sent him down to the clear serenity heavenly lake to cultivate, and his status was equal to that of the 3rd-generation disciples of the clear serenity sect. Yushinlu glanced over and saw a young man dressed in a scholar's robe coming over. He patted the seat and said, "Brother Wu, why don't you come and sit here?" The young man stopped and said, This stone platform is for the elders to sit on. It doesn't seem appropriate for me to go up." Yushinlu said heroically, "It's just a stone platform, why bother about it? Besides, it was I who asked you to come up, so even if something happens, I'll be responsible for it." The young man hesitated for a moment, but still walked up and sat down on the side couch. Yushinlu looked at him a few times and said, "The last time I met with Brother Wu was 10 years ago, but it seems that your cultivation hasn't made any progress." Wu Shangqiu shook his head and said, "I only want to live a carefree life now." He was now nearly 30 years old, and he entered the realm of qi refinement 10 years ago. But at this moment he was still in the 1st level, and there was no progress at all. Under the situation where he didn't lack any external objects or cultivation methods, this could only be due to the limitation of his aptitude. He felt that there was no hope, so he simply placed his affection on the scenery and enjoyed the scenery of the world. Yushinlu snorted, but he didn't mean to look down on him. After all, everyone's choice was different. As long as he felt that the path he took was right, it was fine. Who cared about what others thought? He enjoyed his long life, and I enjoyed my own carefree life. We have nothing to do with each other. Wu Shangqiu looked at the altar and said, I wonder why you called me here today? Yu Shenlu drank all the wine in one go, stood up, and patted him on the shoulder, saying, let's talk somewhere else. Wu Shangqiu hesitated a little, but still nodded. Yu Shenlu's body emitted a mysterious light, and he flew into the sky with the two people, and stopped at the top of the underwater palace. Wu Shangqiu said, Brother, do you know something? Yu Shenlu said, this matter was ordered by the Tao ancestor. He wants the disciples of the Shenyuan sect to go to the unknown world to investigate. I think Brother Wu, you might as well go and try. Wu Shangqiu smiled bitterly and said, I'm a useless person, what can I do? Yu Shenlu shook his head and said, this matter is not about cultivation, even the Qi refinement realm can do it, but there are many benefits. Wu Shangqiu sighed and said, I've already given up on this thought, I just want to enjoy the happiness of this world. Yu Shenlu smiled and said, even if you want to enjoy the happiness, you also need to have a long life. Brother Wu is only in the Qi refinement realm. Even in the mountain and sea realm where spiritual opportunity is abundant, you can only live for 200 years. How much freedom can you enjoy? In my opinion, you might as well go to those worlds, and as long as you succeed, I'll give you some pills to increase your life by 1 or 200 years. It's not a difficult thing. Who knows, it might even help you to build the Xian light realm, and you might even be able to enjoy 400 or 500 years of happiness. Wu Shangqiu was a little tempted when he heard this. After all, he just couldn't see any hope, so he numbed himself and didn't want to think too much about it. He could open his meridians and break through, so he more or less had a Tao heart. And if he could live a little longer, who wouldn't want it? He said with some uncertainty, is it really possible? Yu Shenlu laughed and patted his shoulder hard, saying, Brother Wu, don't worry. Why do you think the sect called so many disciples here? There are at least thousands of people coming with you this time. If it's too dangerous, why would they do this? Don't they want the lives of these disciples? Besides, our patriarch is the grand Tao ancestor. Even if something goes wrong with the patriarch's help, we don't have to be afraid of suffering losses. Wu Shangqiu thought about it and felt that it made sense. Whether it was the sect or the clear nether heavenly lake, they all had their own rules, and they wouldn't send their disciples to their deaths. In that case, he might as well give it a try. He nodded and said, okay, I'll listen to you. A few days later, the list of all the disciples who were willing to go to the bright world was sent to Lu Yenni. She flipped through it and saw that there were a total of 3,727 people. But except for a few people with profound cultivation, most of them were disciples without any hope of success. This was also natural. On the surface, the reward this time was a secret pill that could increase one's lifespan and promote one's achievements. For those who had hopes of cultivation, they naturally wouldn't care too much about these things. But everyone was their family and friends. Even if they didn't want it, it didn't mean that their family and friends didn't want it, so there were still a few talented people who were willing to join. After looking through it, she closed the list and said to a white-haired elder standing at the bottom of the stairs, arrange for these disciples to go. Elder Quan, I'll leave this matter to you. Elder Quan bowed to show that he understood. After he left, he called the more than 3,000 disciples to a place and said, you and the others will go to explore the bright world. Any situation must be reported to the sect in time. If there's a sacrificial ceremony in that world, you have to pay special attention. If you make a great contribution, the sect can confer a decree on this world and erect a monument for you to guard it forever. The disciples were very calm at first, but when they heard this, they couldn't help but show excitement. Conferring a world, what kind of benefit was that? They would be the master of this world. Even if there wasn't any spiritual opportunity in this world, they could still use it to arrange for their family and friends. They would be able to enjoy endless wealth for generations. At this moment, Wu Zhangqiu was also among the crowd. He was also very excited. At the same time, he could hear that the sect really attached great importance to this matter. Otherwise, they wouldn't have taken out such benefits. Elder Quan took in everyone's expressions and was also very satisfied. He gestured and 2 disciples carried a jade box that was about half the height of a person and placed it in front of the stage. He then ordered someone to remove the red cloth on top of the box. When it was opened, many crystal jade beads were revealed. He flicked his sleeves and with a gust of wind, these beads turned into spiritual light and scattered down. They landed accurately in front of everyone. Wu Zhangqiu looked around and saw that many of his fellow sect members had picked up the beads to size them up. He also brought them in front of him curiously. Instantly, he felt a wave of clear air entering his consciousness. He instantly understood how to use this item. At this moment, Elder Quan said, "This is an escape realm bead. It has the functions of a dual realms dial and a heavenly dial. All of you can carry it with you." When he said this, his voice became much more solemn. "After you and the others break into the bright world, you must not let this item leave your body. Otherwise, even the patriarch might not be able to find you. Remember this." Chapter 1990. Breaking through another world wasn't a small matter. Elder Quan explained the most important things to the disciples and asked them to memorize them. After that, he distributed the defensive treasures, chi replenishing pills, array flags, flying boats, and other items that might be useful in this mission. Because this trip was coordinated by the sect, these things were borne by the clear nether heavenly lake. The mountain and sea realm was rich in resources, and they had as many of these things as they wanted. However, whether they traded them or gave them to their fellow sect members had nothing to do with the sect. Their lives were their own. If they didn't care about it, then others wouldn't care either. The disciples were all delighted. Although they hadn't officially gone to the unknown world, and they didn't know if they would be able to make a contribution, just these things alone were enough to make them worth it. Elder Quan said a few more words and finished explaining everything that needed to be explained. Then he waved his sleeve and a ray of spiritual light descended from the sky. Immediately after, a jade ball that was surrounded by golden and copper threads appeared. It was as big as a mountain and was suspended in midair. There were magnificent clouds around it as a backdrop. Indistinctly, scenes of the world beyond the heavens emerged from it. He said, "This item is called the Myriad Realms Instrument of Chaos, and it was given to me by the Patriarch. You will borrow its power to escape to the unknown world." He looked down. "Make some preparations. You will need to be here by the next day. When the time comes, you will be transported to the other side." A disciple shouted, "Can you go now?" Elder Quan looked toward the voice and asked, "What's your name?" That disciple wasn't afraid and said loudly, "Disciple Hao Wentong." Elder Quan nodded and said to a disciple beside him, "Give disciple Hao Wentong a merit and reward him when we return." Hao Wentong was overjoyed and he bowed, "Thank you, Elder." Elder Quan stroked his beard, "No need to thank me. The sect will reward those who go first." Yu Shenlu was standing with Wu Shangqiu and he said, "Brother Wu, it's better to go early. You can still get a merit." Wu Shangqiu thought for a moment and said, "Brother Yu is right." Yu Shenlu asked, "Brother Wu, do you have anything to tell me?" Wu Shangqiu shook his head and said, "There are brothers to take care of the family, there is nothing to worry about." Yu Shenlu cupped his hands and said, "Then I wish Brother Wu a pleasant journey. When you return, the 2 of us will drink and chat merrily." Wu Shangqiu solemnly raised his hand and bowed before walking towards the muddy myriad world instrument. Originally, he was still slightly uneasy about going to the unknown world, but when he saw his fellow disciples walking in with excitement, he seemed to be infected and calmed down slightly. He thought to himself, "I am a disciple of Zhao Yu, of the Shenyuan lineage, under the Tao ancestor. What is there to be afraid of?" After taking a deep breath, he took a step into the magnificent clouds. In an instant, he felt his body being wrapped by an incomparably dazzling light, as if he had melted into it. After that, he was in a trance, and all his senses faded. It was as if he had returned to his mother's womb. After what seemed to be an extremely long period of time, he suddenly woke up. But at this moment he felt a turbulent heat wave, and there was a faint burning sensation on his skin. When he opened his eyes to take a look, his expression could not help but stiffen. He found that he was standing at the edge of a huge pit of earth fire at this moment. Thick smoke billowed around him, covering the sky and the sun. He could not even see the sky and the earth clearly. Below the pit of fire, the lava was tumbling and constantly surging upwards, as if there was a force about to rush out. It was not fixed where one would land after passing through the void. However, cultivators of the upper realm would naturally not be bothered by such trivial matters. After all, they had the ability to collapse mountains and destroy the land and destroy the world. What was a mere earth fire to them? But this was not a good thing for Wu Shangqiu. He hurriedly made a gesture, and a flying boat was summoned. He immediately leaped onto it, and with a shake of the talisman, he steered the boat to fly in the air, trying to break out. However, he was still a step too late. There was a loud rumble, and a shocking wave of air, along with scorching smoke and countless stones, rushed into the sky. The flying boat was thrown into the air and flipped over. Wu Shangqiu's face was full of sweat, and he desperately poured mana into the flying boat in an attempt to stabilize it. But at this moment, there were still countless flying stones and lava hitting the body of the boat. Although there was a restrictive formation outside, it still needed mana to maintain it. He was now an Qi refinement cultivator, so he could not withstand too much torment. With great difficulty, he maintained the restrictive formation and rushed out of the range of the pit of fire. In the end, he managed to break out before his inner Qi was exhausted. But at this moment, he could no longer control the flying boat. Seeing that he was falling towards the ground, he could not care about anything else. With trembling hands, he took out an Qi replenishing pill and was about to swallow it. Just now, when he did that, he felt his body violently jolt, as if he had hit something again. The pill flew out of his hand, and then he felt the world spin around him. After a tremble, his vision went black, and he fell into a coma. Before he woke up, he faintly sensed that someone seemed to have carried him out of the flying boat. However, his strength was gone, and he was injured, so he quickly lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he felt that the light in front of him was slightly dazzling. He slightly narrowed his eyes, and there seemed to be a dense mist flashing in his eyes. He immediately adapted to it and then slowly sat up. First, he raised his arm and looked at himself. He saw that he was wearing a short shirt that seemed to be woven from linen, and the lower part of his body was simply a long piece of cloth. What he was sitting on was not a bed, but several layers of cushions that seemed to be woven from reeds and the like. Then he looked around. This place was a loft built from bamboo and wood. Because there were windows on both sides of the roof, it was bright. There were urns and other things in the corner, and a few steps in front of him was a polished curved branch rack. The clothes he changed out of were placed there, and they seemed to have been washed. He stood up and changed his original clothes. Then, he touched his Qianquan sleeve pouch and found that the escaping realm pearl was still inside. He couldn't help but sigh in relief. As long as this item was still there, he would not be cut off from the sect. Previously, in order to escape from the fire, he did not care about anything else. At this moment, he tried to breathe in and out a few times, and found that the spiritual vigor here was very normal. This meant that even if there were cultivators here, the top level of achievement would not be very high, and the possibility of worship was relatively small. This was because worship would usually only be done in the realm with strong spiritual vigor. The weaker the spiritual vigor, the weaker the senses, the more worthless it was. This was not to say that worship did not exist in places with weak spiritual vigor, but since there were countless worlds in Busa Heaven, there were many good places to choose from, so why would they choose such a place? Thinking about this, he relaxed. After adjusting his breath for a while, his spirit recovered a little, and he walked to the side of the window. Suddenly, he felt a gust of wind, and it was very warm. Outside the window was a lake, with lotus leaves scattered in all directions. The surface of the lake was clear and crystalline, and golden light flickered. There were many fish jumping in the water, and he saw about 10 red lacquer boats, each big enough for one person to sit on, drifting among the lotus flowers. On the boats sat several graceful figures, singing and picking something, and from time to time the sound of laughter could be heard. Wu Shangqiu examined his 5 yin organs, and based on the flow of time in the mountain and sea realm, he could tell that only about 3 or 4 days had passed. Logically speaking, a place with a mouth of fire like that shouldn't have been surrounded by rivers and lakes. Furthermore, if the power of good fortune had been unleashed, the surrounding area wouldn't have been as peaceful as it was now. However, this was another world, after all, and there was no telling what strange changes might have occurred. Just as he was thinking, he heard the sound of deliberately soft footsteps coming from below. Then, the bamboo curtain was lifted, and a slender and pretty girl walked in with a wooden basin. She had a thick braid tied around her head, and she was also dressed in linen clothes. Her skin was slightly dark, and her face was ruddy after working. Her forehead was dripping with sweat. When she saw that he had woken up, she revealed a look of surprise and said a few words that he did not understand. Wu Shangqiu said nothing. Seeing that he did not respond, the young woman thought for a moment, then put the basin down. She went to the corner of the room and came back with an earthenware jar. After removing the lid, she knelt down on one knee and handed it to him. When Wu Shangqiu saw that it was some sort of white paste, with a wooden spoon sticking out of it, he knew that it was food. After a moment's thought, he accepted it and took a bite. Immediately, he felt a cool sensation spread through his lungs, which was actually quite comfortable. He immediately realized that this thing could wash away the smoke from his lungs. Normally, he would have needed to circulate some energy to expel it, but now that he had this, he didn't have to. Without being urged, he ate it, mouthful by mouthful. Then he nodded to the young woman. As he ate, the young girl stared at him without blinking. When she saw him looking at her, a blush appeared on her face. She lowered her head and picked up the thick towel in the wooden basin. She rubbed it a few times and gently wiped Wu Shangqiu's face a few times. Then, she put away the clothes he had changed out of. With a flick of her braid, she lifted the wooden basin and left. Seeing that she had left, Wu Shangqiu could not help but think. He had just arrived in this world, and it was not good to reveal too many different places. Moreover, he had fallen from the sky, and his injuries were not minor. He had not fully recovered yet, and it seemed that the young woman did not have any ill intentions towards him. In that case, he might as well stay here for a few days, observe the situation, and decide what to do next. For the next 2 days, the young woman would come up to bring him water and food every day. However, other than the young woman, there was also a young man of about 17 or 18 years old living in the bamboo house. He should be the young woman's elder brother, and it was that person who carried him here that day. In the past 2 days, Wu Shangqiu had learned the general language of this place. In reality, if he had heard more, he would have learned it even faster. At this moment, he heard a voice from downstairs. "Ah Ling, did that mister say anything?" The young woman's crisp voice rang out. "No, the mister did not say anything." "Ah Ling, where do you think the mister came from? To be able to come out of the fiendish land alive. For the mister to be able to come out of the fiendish land and wear such beautiful clothes, I guess he must be a priest in the Golden Palace." "Golden Palace priest?" The young man's voice was filled with joy. "If that's the case, we can ask him for help, and the evil spirits in our Bai Ling Dang will no longer be able to harm people." Hearing this, Wu Shangqiu tensed up. The fiendish land, the Golden Palace priest, could it be related to that mighty person? However, he also knew that as long as there were no cultivators in any jiekong, then there would be worshippers. The key was to see who the worshipper was, and it did not necessarily have to be the person he was looking for. Deep down in his heart, he only wanted to safely complete the task given by the sect, but he really did not want to find out anything here. He sighed in his heart. Now that things had come to this, he could only take one step at a time. Chapter 1991. After a few days, Wu Shangqiu became familiar with the brother and sister. The brother and sister did not have surnames. One was called Ling, and the other was Gan. The lake outside was called Bai Ling Dang. There were 8 villages of different sizes around it. This place was called Clear Reed Village. Most of the villagers made straw mats, fished, and caught birds for a living. There were about 700 people in the village. As for questions about the Golden Palace priests, he did not ask any of them. He could not ask about these things in a hurry, otherwise, it would be a bad thing. Since the brother and sister knew about it, it was not a secret. After a long time, they would understand. But no matter what, this time he was saved by the brother and sister, so he had to return the favor. He thought about whether he could give the brother and sister some benefits. The simplest thing here was to improve their food and clothing, or give them some good things, but not too much. It was important to know that people were greedy. If the brother and sister suddenly had something good, not only would they not be coveted by others, but it would also cause more trouble. In this kind of stronghold village, almost everyone was related to each other. If one person knew, it was equivalent to the whole village knowing. There was no way to hide the secret. If he ended up harming the brother and sister, it would go against his original intention. So this matter was not urgent. He could observe for a while more before making a decision. Wu Shangqiu's body was getting better day by day. In fact, he had almost recovered when he ran his inner qi the first day, but he did not show it in order not to be too shocking. But even so, it was still very shocking. It should be known that Gon saw him fall from the sky. Normal people would have fallen to their death. Fortunately, the brother and sister believed that he was not a normal person. Now that he was getting better so quickly, they did not think there was anything wrong. Another few days passed, and the weather gradually became hot. The brother and sister went out to work less and less. Most of the time, they were weaving grass and reeds at home. At this time, there was a visitor in the bamboo house. It was an old man in his 50s. Although his clothes were simple, they were very clean. It was obvious that he had been carefully groomed. He also wore a sun-blocking scarf on his head, which was embroidered with light golden cloud patterns. He must be someone with a certain status. The brother and sister were very respectful to him and called him Elder Qian. When Wu Shangqiu first saw this person, he was sure that this person was coming for him. However, this was not a big deal. Wu Shangqiu would inevitably come into contact with the people here. Elder Qian gave him a scrutinizing look, bowed, and said, "Is this Mr. Wu?" Wu Shangqiu did not hastily greet him. He only nodded and said, "Greetings, Elder Qian." Elder Qian revealed a look of surprise. He looked at him again and said, "Mr. Wu is really capable." Wu Shangqiu pretended to be confused and said, "What ability are you talking about, Elder Qian?" Elder Qian stroked his beard and said, "Mister, you are a foreigner, but in just a few days, you were able to learn our local language. Even when I hear it, I feel like an old villager. How is this not a skill?" The two siblings nodded repeatedly. Before old Qian pointed it out, they were just surprised and didn't think much about it. But now, they felt that it was really amazing. Wu Shangqiu smiled faintly. Although he had no hope of advancing in the sect, it depended on who he was compared to. To be able to enter the Tao meant that he was 1 in a million. There were over 3,000 disciples that came out of Zhaoyu this time, and every one of them had photographic memory. Elder Qian asked carelessly, "Where did Mr. come from?" Wu Shangqiu knew that no matter how he fabricated an identity, there might not be a flaw, so he simply said, "It is inconvenient to speak of my identity, but I will not harm anyone." Elder Qian stroked his beard and nodded, saying, "This old man believes. When Mr. Wu was discovered, you landed at the edge of the land of evil spirits, but Mr. was able to safely avoid it. You must be an extraordinary person, so this old man will not ask any further." When Wu Shangqiu heard of the land of evil spirits, he asked, "What is the land of evil spirits?" Elder Qian was a little surprised. Clearly, this was a question that everyone knew. Wu Shangqiu added another sentence. This time, his expression was even more serious as he said, "What is the land of evil spirits?" The same question was asked twice, and the meaning had become completely different. Elder Qian was enlightened, and felt that this question had touched upon a deeper level. He also became solemn, and after thinking carefully for a while, he slowly said, "The source of the air of evil spirits cannot be investigated, but it shouldn't be the dwelling place of the strange ghosts that the foolish couple and foolish woman spoke of. But since it is in the heaven and earth, there is a natural order. This old man's wisdom is lacking, and it is difficult for me to see through it. I only have a shallow opinion. If there is a lack of righteousness in the world, there will be evil spirits overflowing. Wu Shangqiu thought of the encounter that day, and instantly deduced some things from his words. After a moment of silence, he then said, "Formless form and sound belong to the original, but the hearts of the people in the world are fickle." Elder Qian was startled. This sentence clearly disagreed with his opinion, but this did not prevent them from talking, and there was no need to argue over it. This was because this was something that each person had their own opinion, and until now, no one could explain it clearly. The two siblings did not understand what the two were talking about, but they both revealed expressions of admiration. In their impression, being able to speak words that they did not understand was also a very powerful ability. They simply did not think too much about it, and only served tea at the side. Wu Shangqiu and Elder Qian chatted for a long time. Although most of the time he was listening, he would occasionally comment, but every time he said a few words, he would always hit the key points, causing Elder Qian to exclaim in admiration. Unknowingly, Elder Qian had stayed here for more than 4 hours. Because it was getting late and he was a little tired, he made an appointment to visit another day, and then he bid farewell and left. When Wu Shangqiu returned to the attic, he began to think. Through his conversation with Elder Qian, he now understood that the so-called ominous land was something like a mirage, but it was real and existed everywhere. Some would constantly spread, some would mysteriously disappear, and after a period of time, they would reappear, just like the place he had been to, which had already disappeared. He thought about it, and there had never been anything like this in the mountain and sea realm. Logically speaking, the spiritual qi of this realm could not be considered strong or weak, and it could even be considered weak, so such a thing should not exist. What he was worried about now was the existence of such a place, and the people of the world would inevitably worship ghosts and gods. This not only made it more difficult for him to verify the worship, but also increased the number of uncertain variables. He thought about it, and felt that it was better to go and see for himself. So he went downstairs to find Agon, and suggested that he go to the ominous land. Agon said, "Sir, there is nothing left over there." Wu Shangqiu said, "I know." Then he sighed, "I'll go take a look, just to be at ease." Agon did not know what he meant, but looking at Wu Shangqiu, he guessed that perhaps he had a companion who was lost inside, and suddenly felt a sense of sympathy, and said, "Then I'll take you there again tomorrow." On the second day, when the sun rose, Agon carried a basket of herbs on his back, put on a bamboo hat to cover the sun, and went west with Wu Shangqiu along the river. Every time the baleful aura burst forth, there would always be some rarely seen herbs appearing in the surroundings, and then they would disappear again. However, normal people would have stayed far away, not daring to get close at all. Agon was a bold person. As long as the baleful aura appeared, he would go to the nearby area to pick the herbs. It was also at that time that he discovered Wu Shangqiu, and Ning carried him back. The boat traveled for 2 hours, and the two of them got off the boat, walked another 2 or 3 miles, and arrived at the original place of the fiery mouth. The two of them came to a small mound. Agon pointed to the front and said, "Sir, it's here." Wu Shangqiu looked. The pit of the fiery mouth from before had already disappeared. What was left was only a plain swamp. Among the reeds, there were egrets flapping their wings and flying, completely unable to imagine what it looked like before. He glanced around. This time he came, first to take a look at the situation here, and second to find the flying boat. Right now he was secretly making hand signs, trying to find the location of the flying boat, but he could not sense anything at all. He couldn't help but frown. If this thing was lost in the ominous land, then it would be fine, but if it was obtained by the natives with power, he was waiting to investigate further, but suddenly saw, in the distance, there were 10 people wearing green clothes. They were driving stakes into the swamp. He asked, "Who are those people?" Agon revealed some fear and said, "Sir, it's the people from the Huailu Manor. They are suppressing evil. If they can suppress evil, then within a few years, evil will not appear again." Wu Shangqiu's brows tightened even more. After talking with Elder Qian, he also knew about this group of people. Where there is an ominous land, there will be people suppressing evil, These people built villas in various places, usually specializing in dealing with non-human ghosts that escaped from the ominous land. It was said that it was because of these people that evil did not spread all over the world. He was now worried that the flying boat had fallen into their hands. At this time, the people from the Huailu Manor also seemed to have noticed them. They pointed at the two of them, and a few people even walked towards them. Agon panicked and said, "Sir, shouldn't we go?" Wu Shangqiu said calmly, "Don't worry, I'll handle everything." If he turned around and left now, wouldn't that mean that there was something wrong with him? Agon was a villager nearby. For a force like the Huailu Manor to want to find him, it would not be too difficult. Moreover, he also wanted to come into contact with these aborigines who were suspected to have supernatural powers, so he stood there without moving. The figures of the few people from Willow Huai Manor seemed to drift for a moment. They were clearly very far away, but within a few breaths, they arrived in front of them. Then a leader walked out. Under the bamboo hat that she wore, a pair of clear autumn eyes could be seen. Below it was a veil. It was a woman. She used a slightly hoarse voice to say, "Who are you?" After Wu Shangqiu came to this world, his identity had always been a problem, but because he expected that he would come into contact with the aborigines in the future, after talking with Elder Qian, he also thought of an excuse. "I am Lian Shou. I passed by this place along the way." The so-called Lian Shou was similar to the other villas. They were all people who dealt with evil spirits, but they usually did things alone. They made a living by collecting some remuneration, but sometimes they would also accept employment from the villas. Hearing him say this, the few people behind the woman all revealed a look of contempt. But this was also the result that Wu Shangqiu wanted. With this kind of identity, the other party would not pay too much attention to him, but it was not to the extent that they would not be able to come into contact with him at all. The woman's beautiful eyes looked around him and said, "Since you are Lian Shou, then come with me." As she said this, she turned around and walked towards the place that just now came from. Wu Shangqiu took a deep breath. He knew that this woman should have some suspicions towards him. If he did not come up with a decent method, he was afraid that there would be trouble. But this was also his first step into this world. If he did it well, he might be able to have a stable foothold in this world. Chapter 1992. Wu Shangqiu said to Agon, "Brother Gon, you can go back first." Agon shook his head and said, "I'll follow you." Wu Shangqiu thought for a while and said, "That's good too. Brother Gon, stay by my side and don't walk around. Don't panic if you see anything. I'll make sure you're safe." Agon nodded his head and said, "I trust you." The two people from Huailu Manor who were walking in front looked back. Although they didn't say anything, it was obvious from their eyes that they were urging him. Wu Shangqiu strode forward and followed. The lady walked very quickly and came to a small depression in a blink of an eye. There was a pool the size of a well at the bottom. It was dark and murky. From afar, there was a foul air coming out and it was bubbling. A few people from Huailu Manor couldn't help but cover their noses. The lady acted as if she didn't hear them and called, "Lu Ju." Immediately, a rather sturdy man walked out and said in a deep voice, "Eldest miss?" The lady said, "Catch one." Lu Ju replied and took off the stick on his back. There was a sticky disc on the stick and it looked like it was smeared with something. He grabbed it with both hands and sent it straight down. Not long after, his hands felt heavy and he suddenly shouted. He exerted strength from his waist and pulled a little person up. Upon closer inspection, it was clearly in the form of a ghost. Its head was the size of a human, but its body was only half a foot tall. It was emaciated, had protruding fangs, and had a ferocious look in its eyes. At this moment, it was ceaselessly letting out irritating shrieks, but its scalp was stuck to it, so it could only struggle endlessly. The people from Huailu Manor looked normal. It was obvious that they were used to seeing these things. Agon also stared with his eyes wide open. He was a bold person and with so many people around, he was even more fearless. At this moment, the one called Lu Ju released the stick and rubbed his hands together. The ghost was crumpled up like a piece of crumpled paper. He then took out a box of bamboo lots and stuffed the ghost into it. Then, he kept it and placed it at the side. The woman tilted her head and said to Wu Shangqiu, I've already used the ghost sticking rod once. This person won't fall for it again. Since you are Lien Shou, you must be an expert in dealing with these ghosts. Please take all these unclean things down there. Liuhuai Manor will not be stingy with your rewards. Wu Shangqiu just now saw that Lu Ju was using his spiritual energy. He calmed down a bit. If that was the case, he wouldn't be seen as an anomaly. He sensed that there were about 12 of these things down there. Although there were ghosts and spirits in the mountain and sea realm, if they weren't refined, they posed no threat to Taoist cultivators. Furthermore, this thing didn't exceed that level, and therefore, dealing with it wouldn't be difficult. The key was to use a method that wouldn't be too obvious. He raised his head and saw that the people from Lu Huai Manor were all staring at him with burning eyes. He pondered for a moment, then reached into his sleeve. A moment later, he took out a handful of powder. It was originally a stack of paper talismans, but he had turned it into this so that they wouldn't be able to tell what it was. Although he didn't know the whole story behind the fiendish lands, he could tell that this place had been infected by the foul air. As long as he could cleanse it, he could force the so-called baby ghosts to come out, and he wouldn't have to waste time looking for them. He walked over to the edge of the fiendish lands and opened his palm. He tilted it slightly and sprinkled the talisman ash into the fiendish lands. What happened next was astonishing. In an instant, the fiendish lands turned from black to white, as if all of the filth had been cleansed. The lady's eyes flickered. She had never seen something like this before, and she couldn't help but look more serious. At this moment, someone suddenly shouted, "There's movement." The fiendish lands gurgled, and then suddenly there was a huge splash. Baby ghosts scrambled out of the fiendish lands, as if there was something terrifying in the fiendish lands. As soon as they appeared, they let out shrill screams and charged at the people around them. Wu Shangqiu was the closest, so he naturally bore the brunt of the attack. However, in his eyes, the baby ghosts were incredibly slow. Without any hesitation, he reached out and tapped one of the baby ghosts on its head. It didn't make a sound before it fell to the ground. The people of Huai Lu Manor weren't calm. It wasn't that they couldn't deal with the baby ghosts, it was just that they couldn't catch them all. Now that the fiendish lands had appeared, it was easier for them to make their move. The lady walked over to Wu Shangqiu and looked him over with her bright eyes. "Many thanks, sir." Wu Shangqiu said, "It's nothing." The lady waved her hand, and a servant came over with a jade plate. On top of the jade plate were 5 knife-shaped gold coins. Wu Shangqiu calmly accepted the coins. The lady said, "The fiendish lands have a lot of poison. I'm afraid we'll have to trouble you." Wu Shangqiu said, "I'll be staying in the nearby reed village. If there's anything, you can come and look for me." Seeing that there was nothing else, he called out to Agon and walked back the way he came. Agon followed him excitedly. He had never seen such a scene in his life. He would be able to brag about it when he got back. The people of Huai Lu Manor watched the two of them leave. Lu Ju said, "Miss, this person isn't simple. Just now that I've taken a closer look, the evil chi on the baby ghost has been burned away, leaving only its skin behind." The lady said, "Can you tell which branch it came from?" Lu Ju tried hard to recall and said, "Forgive me for my ignorance, but I can't tell which branch it came from." Seeing that the lady was silent, he said, "Do you want me to go and investigate?" The lady said, "There's no need for that. The 8 mountains, 7 rivers, 100 paths, 9 paths, 10 paths, 9 paths, 10 paths. There are so many branches in the world, how can I know all of them? Since this person has his ways and is staying nearby, he must have come into contact with many places. There's no need to pry into other people's secrets. After some time, you'll naturally understand everything." Lu Ju said, "Miss, you're still the most reliable. You've never been particular when working under 2nd Mississippi." The lady looked at him and shook her head, saying, "I'm just making a decision. 2nd sister has a lot of thoughts, so please bear with her." But Lu Ju said, "Miss, you're generous to us. We're more than willing to follow you." The lady did not continue the topic and said, "Let's settle the matter here first. If we can't get rid of the remaining poison in this land of evil spirits, there's no point in talking about it." After Wu Shangqiu went back, He didn't bother with Argon, who was bragging to everyone, and went back to the attic. Now that he had the wealth of this world, he could move out, but he still liked to stay here. He thought to himself, looks like the flying boat was not taken by Huai Lu Manor. It should have been brought to the land of evil spirits. If that was the case, he could accept it. He took the escaping realm pearl and came out to take a look. This world looked like it was not a shallow place. Should he contact the mountain gate and ask for more people from the same sect to come and help? But on second thought, it seemed like he could still handle it. Moreover, if he asked for help, it would not be his own merit. It was better to wait until he found out the truth. Thinking about this, he kept the item again. He then sat there and breathed in and out. There was a faint sign of him breaking through, which surprised him. He had long cultivated 12 streams of clear and turbid qi. He was at the last step of merging them. When he was on the mountain, there was no lack of spiritual vigor, but he could not take the step. On the contrary, when he was in a place with poor spiritual vigor, he could improve. He really did not know what to say. He thought about it carefully. Ever since he entered this world, although it looked peaceful, he was actually treading on thin ice. Under such pressure, he was able to force out his potential. He could not help but sigh. No wonder the elders in the sect always talk about gaining experience. It is indeed useful. Since there was hope for him to advance, he wouldn't delay any longer. He immediately stood up, bade farewell to Argon and his sister, and left the room. After walking for 20 miles, he found a secluded place and took out a reed canopy that could accommodate one person sitting cross-legged from his sleeve. This object didn't have much use, but it could conceal the strange phenomenon when he was breaking through. He made some arrangements around him and planted formation flags. After he entered, he meditated for a night and successfully broke through to the second level of the qi cultivation realm. When he came out again, he looked at the heaven and earth. He was filled with confidence. The cultivation method he cultivated was also of the Zhaoyu sect. Now that he had broken through to the second stage, he could already soar and fly. Even if he didn't have a flying boat, he could still come and go as he pleased. It could be said that he had another life-saving method to protect himself. Seeing that it was already morning, he returned to the reed village. A few days later, Lu Ju came to find him again. This time, it was for the land of evil spirits. Wu Shangqiu wanted to spend more time with him, so he did not refuse and happily agreed. However, when he went there to take a look, he didn't expect that after a few days, the swamp was filled with foul air and there were signs of overflowing. It was as if the fiendish land had reappeared. Moreover, he could faintly see countless strange ghosts in the surroundings. When the woman saw him, she said, "Mister, you're here." Wu Shangqiu could hear a trace of anxiety in her calm voice. He imitated her and bowed, then said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" The woman looked ahead and said, "In 2 months, if I can suppress the baleful aura here, I will be in charge of Lu Huai in the future. I know that Mr. is capable, so I hope that you can help me. If you succeed, I will definitely not Mr. Wu Shangqiu thought about it. He did not ask what would happen if he failed, but he instinctively felt that this was a great opportunity. He replied, "I am willing to help." The woman looked at him for a moment, then said seriously, "All right. I will be relying on you for the next 2 months. Mountain and Sea Realm, in the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake. The all-knowing Myriad Realms instrument rotated continuously. Every once in a while, a beam of light would shoot out and condense into a talisman. At this time, a servant would come forward, take the talisman down, and present it to Elder Quan. After taking the talisman and reading it, he went to Lu Yan's clone and reported, "Master, most of the 3,000 disciples we sent that day have reported back. There are no special discoveries, but there are still over 200 people who are still missing. Among them, 19 places have lost contact with the all-knowing Myriad Realms instrument." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.